Strength is everything. Power is absolute. Bow to your alpha, and you'll be protected. That's what the elders whispered to Jack every night in the orphanage, their voices thick with reverence for the mighty King Aldrich the Alpha whose dominance had kept the northern kingdoms safe for 3 decades. But Jack would learn that strength without wisdom is just violence waiting for a victim. And when you're born without a wolf, without a rank, without even a name that matters, you learn that the exterior, the power, the roar, would always matter more than the truth bleeding quietly in the shadows. King Aldrich ruled with an iron fist and a wolf the size of a warhorse. His word was law. His fury was legendary. His alpha aura could bring grown warriors to their knees with a single glance. But there are some things even an alpha king cannot stop. And Jack, powerless, forgotten, invisible, was about to become one of them. Chapter 1: The Wolfless Boy. The grand hall of Shadow Peak Castle smelled of roasted venison and ambition. Chandeliers dripping with crystal cast golden light over the sea of nobles, warriors, and pack leaders gathered for the king's annual summit, a display of power, allegiance, and hierarchy that reminded everyone exactly where they stood in the natural order. At the very back, pressed against the cold stone wall near the servants' entrance, stood Jack. 17 years old, scrawny, unremarkable, wolfless. He wasn't supposed to be here. Orphans from the foundling house rarely received invitations to royal events. But Jack had volunteered to serve tonight, carrying trays, pouring wine, remaining invisible. It was the only way someone like him could glimpse the world of power he'd never belonged to. "Move, whelp." A broad-shouldered guard shoved past him, nearly knocking the empty tray from Jack's hands. "You're blocking the way." Jack stumbled, catching himself against the wall. "Sorry, sir." The guard didn't even glance back. This was Jack's existence. Apologies for existing. Invisible, unless he was in the way. At the foundling house, the other orphans had wolves, weak ones, perhaps, but wolves, nonetheless. They could shift, could feel the moon's pull, could sense the pack bonds that tied the kingdom together. Jack had nothing. No wolf, no bond. No connection to the magic that made their world turn. Pathetic, the matron had told him once, her lips curled in disgust. A boy without a wolf is barely a boy at all. "You should be grateful we even feed you." He was grateful. Desperately, humiliatingly grateful. From his position near the wall, Jack watched the spectacle unfold. At the head of the hall, seated on a throne of black iron and wolf pelts, was King Aldrich himself. Massive, broad-shouldered, with silver threading through his dark hair and eyes like shattered ice. His presence filled the room not just physically, but spiritually. His alpha aura pressed down on everyone present, a constant reminder of dominance. Beside him sat his daughter, Princess Ethel. Beautiful, poised, with her mother's delicate features, and her father's commanding presence. She was 17 Jack's age, but she might as well have lived in a different universe. Her wolf was already legendary. A silver beast with eyes like moonlight, graceful and deadly. "Attention!" The royal herald's voice boomed across the hall. "His Majesty will now address the assembly." The crowd fell silent instantly. Even the boldest warriors knew better than to speak over the Alpha King. King Aldrich rose, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. His voice was deep, resonant, carrying effortlessly across the vast space. Another year, another display of loyalty, another reminder that the Northern Kingdoms stand united under one law. The strong protect, the weak submit, and together we survive. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "But strength is not given," Aldrich continued, his gaze sweeping across the assembled nobles. "It is earned, proven, tested." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Which is why, this year, I announce a trial." The hall erupted in whispers. Trials were rare, dangerous tests of worthiness that could elevate a common wolf to nobility or destroy a noble's reputation forever. "My daughter, Princess Ethel, will soon come of age to rule. But no heir of mine will take the throne without proving their worth. Therefore, I issue a challenge to the entire kingdom." Aldrich's smile was sharp as a blade. "Any wolf, noble or common, warrior or scholar, may compete for the chance to become Ethel's betrothed and, one day, rule beside her." The whispers exploded into excited chatter. This was unprecedented. The chance to marry into royalty. To become the future king consort, every ambitious wolf in the kingdom would compete. Jack's chest tightened. Of course someone like him could never. The trials will test strength, cunning, and loyalty, Aldrich announced. 3 challenges. 3 eliminations. Only the worthy will remain. His eyes gleamed with something dark and satisfied. And the first trial begins tomorrow. The hall erupted in cheers and applause. Warriors pounded their fists against their chests. Nobles whispered strategies. Even the servants buzzed with excitement. Jack turned to leave, to return to his invisible existence, when a voice cut through the noise. "You there, boy." He froze. Turned slowly. Princess Ethel was looking directly at him. Every eye in the hall followed her gaze. Suddenly, Jack wasn't invisible anymore. He was exposed, pinned like a butterfly under the scrutiny of hundreds of powerful wolves. "Come here," Ethel commanded, her voice soft but carrying the unmistakable weight of authority. Jack's legs moved on their own, carrying him forward through the parting crowd. Whispers followed him like hungry ghosts. Is that the wolfless boy? What could she possibly want with him? Disgraceful. Even acknowledging his presence. Jack stopped at the base of the throne platform, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. He dropped to one knee, eyes fixed on the floor. "Rise," Ethel said. He did, though he couldn't bring himself to meet her eyes. "What's your name?" she asked. "Jack, Your Highness." His voice was barely a whisper. "Jack." She seemed to test the name on her tongue. "I've seen you before. At the Foundling House. You help with the gardens, don't you?" He blinked in surprise. She'd noticed him? "Yes, Your Highness. You have good hands, careful hands." She smiled, and for a moment, it seemed almost genuine. "My father's roses have never looked better." A laugh rippled through the crowd, not warm, but mocking. The idea that a princess would notice a wolfless orphan for his gardening skills was apparently hilarious. King Aldrich's expression darkened. "Ethel, we have important matters to discuss." "Of course, father." She turned back to Jack, and her smile took on a strange quality, something he couldn't quite read. "You may return to your duties, Jack, but perhaps you might consider entering the trials yourself." The hall fell into stunned silence. Then the laughter came. Wave after wave of it, cruel and cutting. A wolfless boy in the trials. She's mocking him. How deliciously cruel. Jack's face burned. He wanted to disappear, to melt into the stone floor. Your Highness, I couldn't possibly." "Why not?" Ethel's voice was innocent, curious. "My father said any wolf may compete. But you don't have a wolf, do you, Jack?" The laughter grew louder. "No, Your Highness," he whispered. "Then I suppose you can't compete after all." She turned away from him, dismissing him as easily as one might dismiss a servant. "Such a shame. I would have enjoyed seeing you try." The cruelty of it hit him like a physical blow. She hadn't been kind. She'd been setting him up for public humiliation. Reminding him of exactly what he was. Nothing. Jack bowed deeply, mechanically, and retreated through the laughing crowd. Their jeers followed him all the way out of the hall, through the servants' corridors, out into the cold night air. He didn't stop until he reached the edge of the castle grounds, where the manicured gardens gave way to wild forest. There, hidden by shadows and trees, he finally let himself breathe. His hands were shaking, his eyes burned, but he refused to cry. He'd learned long ago that tears changed nothing. Pathetic display. Jack spun around. A figure emerged from the darkness, an old woman, hunched and wrapped in tattered robes. Her eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight, ancient and knowing. "Who are you?" Jack asked, taking a step back. "Someone who sees what others don't." She moved closer, surprisingly quick despite her apparent age. "Tell me, boy. Do you believe what they say about you? That you're nothing without a wolf?" "It doesn't matter what I believe," Jack said bitterly. "It's the truth. Is it?" The old woman tilted her head. "Or is it simply what they've told you? Over and over. Until you believed it yourself." "I don't have a wolf," Jack said flatly. "That's not a belief. That's a fact." The woman circled him slowly, studying him like he was a puzzle to be solved. What if I told you that you're not wolfless? What if I told you that something far more powerful sleeps inside you, something that terrifies the alphas so much they've spent centuries making sure people like you believe you're worthless? Jack's breath caught. What are you talking about? The trials, the woman said, ignoring his question. You should enter them. Are you insane? I can't. Can't? Her eyes flashed. Or won't. There's a difference, boy, a crucial one. I don't have a wolf, Jack repeated, frustration creeping into his voice. The trials test strength, dominance, pack bonds, everything I don't have. I'd be killed in the first challenge. The trials test worthiness, the woman corrected. And worthiness isn't the same as strength. King Aldrich has built his entire reign on confusing the two. But you. She reached out and pressed one gnarled finger against his chest, right over his heart. You know the difference, don't you? Jack wanted to argue, to walk away, but something in her words resonated. He did know the difference. He'd spent his entire life watching the strong abuse the weak, watching power wielded without wisdom or mercy. Even if you're right, he said quietly. What could I possibly do? I'm nobody. You're exactly who this kingdom needs. The old woman smiled, revealing surprisingly sharp teeth. Enter the trials, Jack. Not to win the princess's hand, but to show them all that their alpha means nothing when measured against what truly matters. And what's that? You'll know when the time comes. She began to fade back into the shadows. The trials begin at dawn. Be there. Or spend the rest of your life wondering what you might have been. Wait, Jack called after her. Who are you? But she was already gone, leaving only her words hanging in the cold night air. Jack stood alone in the darkness, his mind racing. Everything logical told him to forget this conversation, to return to the foundling house, to accept his place in the world. But something else, something deeper whispered that maybe, just maybe, the old woman was right. Maybe it was time to stop apologizing for existing. Maybe it was time to see what happened when a wolfless boy refused to bow. The moon hung heavy overhead, and for the first time in his life, Jack felt something stirring inside him. Not a wolf. Something else. Something that didn't have a name yet. Something that terrified him and thrilled him in equal measure. At dawn, the trials would begin, and Jack, powerless, forgotten, invisible, would be there. Chapter 2. The Impossible Contender. Dawn broke over Shadow Peak Castle like a blade cutting through silk, sharp, cold, and unforgiving. The tournament grounds sprawled across the eastern meadow, a vast arena where pack hierarchies had been established and broken for generations. Wooden stands encircled a massive clearing, already filling with spectators eager to watch the trials unfold. Jack stood at the edge of the competitor's entrance, his stomach churning with equal parts terror and determination. He'd barely slept, spending the night wrestling with the old woman's words, with his own doubts, with the screaming certainty that this was either the bravest or stupidest decision of his life. Around him, the other competitors gathered, and they were everything he wasn't. Warriors with arms thick as tree trunks, nobles dripping in silver and gold, wolves who radiated power like heat from a forge. There were at least 50 of them, all eyeing each other with predatory calculation, assessing threats and weaknesses. And then there was Jack. Thin, unremarkable, wearing borrowed clothes that didn't quite fit. Is this a joke? A massive warrior with a scarred face and arms covered in tribal tattoos sneered down at him. Did someone's servant get lost? Did someone's servant? Laughter rippled through the nearby competitors. I'm here to compete, Jack said, keeping his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his throat. The warrior, his name badge read, Thorin Ironjaw, threw his head back and laughed. You? Compete? Boy, I could snap you like a twig before my wolf even emerged. Then it's a good thing the trials test more than brute strength, Jack replied, surprising himself with his boldness. Thorin's eyes narrowed dangerously. His aura pressed outward, not alpha strong but powerful enough to make Jack's knees weak. Careful, whelp. Disrespect will get you killed out here. Enough. A new voice cut through the tension. A tall woman with midnight black hair and golden eyes stepped between them. Her aura was controlled, refined, but unmistakably powerful. Save your aggression for the trials, Ironjaw. Or are you afraid of a little competition? Thorin snarled but backed off, melting into the crowd. The woman turned to Jack, studying him with unsettling intensity. "You're the wolfless boy, the one the princess humiliated last night." It wasn't a question. Jack nodded stiffly. "I'm Sherry Nightshade, Beta bloodline, Southern Territories." She extended her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Jack shook it. Her grip was firm, testing. "I'll give you this, you've got courage, showing up here. Foolish courage, perhaps, but courage nonetheless. Is there a difference?" Jack asked. Sherry's lips curved into a slight smile. "We're about to find out." A horn blast echoed across the grounds, 3 long notes that silenced the crowd instantly. The competitors straightened, all attention turning to the royal platform where King Aldrich stood, flanked by Princess Ethel and his council of elders. The king's voice boomed across the arena, amplified by magic. "Competitors, you stand here seeking the highest honor this kingdom can bestow, the right to stand beside my daughter, to one day help rule these lands. But power without proving is tyranny. Strength without testing is weakness in disguise." His gaze swept across the assembled wolves, cold and assessing. When his eyes landed on Jack, they widened fractionally in surprise, then narrowed in something darker. Disgust? Anger? Jack couldn't quite read it. "The first trial," Aldrich continued, "will test your hunting prowess. In the Darkwood forest behind you, 10 enchanted stags have been released. Each stag bears a golden collar. Your task is simple. Bring me a collar before sunset. Those who succeed advance. Those who fail," his smile was sharp, "will be escorted from the grounds and forbidden from ever attempting these trials again." Murmurs rippled through the competitors. 10 collars, 50 wolves. Additionally, Aldrich added, his voice taking on a cruel edge, "any wolf who returns empty-handed will be marked with a shame brand, a magical sigil that announces their failure to anyone they meet for the next year." The crowd gasped. Shame brands were ancient, brutal magic social death for any wolf who bore one. "And one final rule," the king said, his eyes finding Jack again. "Any competitor caught interfering with another through sabotage, violence, or theft will be immediately disqualified and marked as oathbreaker. Such wolves will be banished from the northern kingdoms entirely." That last rule felt oddly specific, as though aimed directly at Jack. "A warning, you don't belong here, and if you cause trouble you'll lose everything. The hunt begins." Now, the competitors exploded into motion. Wolves burst from their human forms mid-run, massive beasts of fur and fang racing toward the Darkwood. The transformation was seamless, beautiful, a display of the magic Jack had never possessed. He ran on human legs, already falling behind. The forest swallowed him within seconds. Ancient trees towered overhead, their branches weaving together so thickly that the morning light barely penetrated. The sounds of the hunt echoed all around, howls, snarls, the thunder of paws against earth. Jack had no enhanced senses to track the stags. No supernatural speed to catch them. No claws or fangs to bring them down. All he had was his mind, and the faint, nagging memory of something the old woman had said. Worthiness isn't the same as strength. He slowed his run to a jog, then a walk, forcing himself to think. 50 wolves chasing 10 stags through the forest. The fastest, strongest wolves would catch the first few easily, but the stags were enchanted they wouldn't be stupid. They'd be warded against simple tracking magic, would know to avoid the obvious paths. So where would a magical creature hide when being hunted by 50 predators? Jack closed his eyes, remembering his years tending the castle gardens. He knew plants, understood how living things sought safety. The stags wouldn't just run randomly, they'd seek places where their natural advantages gave them an edge. Water. Magical creatures always sought running water. It disrupted scent trails, confused tracking spells, provided escape routes. Jack changed direction, heading toward the sound of distant rushing water. The Serpent's Run, a fast-moving stream that cut through the heart of the Darkwood. If he was right, at least 1 or 2 stags would be hiding near it. The sounds of the hunt faded as he moved deeper into the forest. Good. Let the wolves tear each other apart, fighting over the easy prey. He'd find his own way. 20 minutes later, he reached the stream. The water was crystal clear, moving fast over smooth stones. And there, Jack's breath caught. On the opposite bank, partially hidden by hanging willow branches, stood a magnificent stag. Its coat shimmered with an otherworldly sheen, and around its neck glinted a golden collar. The stag's eyes met his. Intelligent, assessing. Jack froze. He had no way to cross the stream quickly, no way to run the creature down, no way to overpower it. If he tried to approach, it would bolt. "I'm not here to hurt you," Jack said softly, surprising himself by speaking aloud. The stag tilted its head, ears swiveling toward him. "I know you probably don't believe me. I'm competing in a trial that requires your collar." But Jack sat down on the riverbank, making himself non-threatening. "I'm not like the others. I don't have a wolf. I can't hunt like they do." The stag remained still, watching. "The truth is," Jack continued, "I don't even know why I'm here. Everyone says I'm worthless, powerless, nothing without a wolf to call my own. And maybe they're right. Maybe I'm a fool for thinking I could be anything more." The words came easier now, pouring out like poison from a wound. "But last night someone told me that strength isn't what I've been taught to believe. That maybe, just maybe, there's a different kind of power. One that doesn't come from dominance or fear or tearing others down to lift yourself up." The stag took a step closer to the water's edge. "So I'm asking you," Jack said, meeting the creature's eyes directly. "Not as a hunter, not as someone trying to dominate you, but as someone who understands what it's like to be chased by things stronger than you. To be valued only for what others can take from you." He stood slowly, extending his hand across the water. "I'm asking for your help. Not demanding. Not taking. Asking." For a long moment, nothing happened. The forest held its breath. Then the stag moved. It stepped into the water, wading across the stream with elegant grace. It approached Jack slowly, cautiously, until they stood face to face. Up close, Jack could see the intelligence in its eyes. This wasn't just a magical creature, this was a being with consciousness, with choice. The stag lowered its head. Jack's hands trembled as he reached for the golden collar. The metal was warm to the touch, humming with enchantment. He carefully unfastened the clasp, and the stag exploded. Not violently, but in a burst of golden light that forced Jack to shield his eyes. When the brilliance faded, the stag was gone. In its place stood a woman. She was tall, with silver hair that cascaded past her shoulders and eyes the color of amber. Intricate tattoos covered her arms, ancient runes that seemed to pulse with their own light. She wore simple robes of forest green, and her smile was both ancient and kind. "Well done, Jack of no pack," she said, her voice carrying the whisper of wind through leaves. Jack stumbled backward, nearly dropping the collar. You're not a stag." "I am many things. The stag was merely one form." She gestured to the collar in his hands. "You passed the first test, but not the one the king intended." "I don't understand." "The enchanted stags," she explained, "were designed to test hunting prowess, yes, but they were also designed to reveal character. Most competitors would have tried to kill us, to take the collars by force. Some would have used magic to bind us. A rare few might have attempted clever traps." She stepped closer, and Jack felt no threat from her only ancient power held in perfect balance. "But you," she continued, "were the first in 3 decades to simply ask, to treat a magical creature as an equal deserving of choice, rather than a resource to be exploited." 3 decades? Jack repeated, his mind racing. "The last person to pass this test," the woman said softly, "was a young wolf named Aldrich, before he became king, before power and dominance consumed him." Her expression darkened. "He too understood once that strength without compassion is merely cruelty. But he forgot, and in forgetting, he built a kingdom that values only force." She placed her hand over Jack's, over the golden collar. "This collar will grant you passage to the next trial. But know this, by choosing compassion over domination, you've revealed something that will terrify the king more than any rival alpha ever could." "What?" Jack whispered. "That there might be another way to rule. Another kind of power." She began to fade, her form becoming translucent. The king's fury couldn't stop what came next. "Remember that, Jack, when the trials turn darker. When he tries to break you, remember that your greatest strength is the one thing his alpha dominance can never touch." "Wait," Jack called out. "What is it? What strength?" But she was already gone, leaving only her final words hanging in the air. "Your humanity." Jack emerged from the dark wood as the sun reached its zenith, the golden collar clutched in his hand. The tournament grounds erupted in shocked whispers as he approached the royal platform. He was the third to return. Thorin Ironjaw had arrived first, his wolf form still bloody from the kill. Sherry Nightshade had been second, her collar pristine and her expression unreadable. And now Jack Wolfless, Impossible Jack, walked forward with his prize. King Aldric's face was a mask of barely controlled rage. Princess Ethel leaned forward in her seat, eyes wide with something that might have been fascination or fear. "Present your collar," Aldric commanded, his voice tight. Jack climbed the platform steps and knelt, extending the golden collar with both hands. The king snatched it, examining it with narrowed eyes as if searching for some trick, some deception. But the collar was genuine, the enchantment intact. "Explain," Aldric growled, "how a wolfless boy managed to succeed where warriors have failed." Every eye in the arena fixed on Jack. This was it, the moment where he could retreat into invisibility, could apologize for existing, could make himself small, or he could do something different. Jack raised his head, meeting the king's glacial gaze directly. "I asked." Silence. "You asked," Aldric repeated slowly, as if the words made no sense. "The stag had a choice. I respected that choice. And it chose to help me." Jack kept his voice steady, even as his heart hammered. Isn't that what leadership should be? Not forcing submission, but earning respect? The arena erupted. Some spectators cheered, shocked by his audacity. Others shouted insults, outraged that a wolfless boy would dare question the king's philosophy. But Jack only watched Aldric's face. And what he saw there chilled him to the bone. Not anger, not outrage, fear. For just a moment, King Aldric, the most powerful alpha in the northern kingdoms, looked genuinely afraid of a 17-year-old orphan with no wolf, no power, no rank. Then the moment passed. The king's expression hardened into cold fury. "You advance to the next trial," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But know this, boy. Cleverness only takes you so far. The second trial will test something you cannot fake, cannot charm your way through." He leaned closer, his alpha aura pressing down like a physical weight. "It will test your wolf. And when you have none to show, your humiliation will be absolute." Jack forced himself not to flinch, not to bow, not to break under the pressure. "I look forward to it, Your Majesty." The words tasted like ashes, but he spoke them anyway. By sunset, 6 more competitors had returned with collars. 2 had returned empty-handed and been marked with the shame brand, their screams echoing across the grounds as the magic seared into their skin. The remaining competitors never returned at all, claimed by the forest, by their own hubris, by the dangers that lurked in the dark wood. 10 competitors remained for the second trial, and as Jack returned to his small tent at the edge of the competitors' camp, he couldn't shake the image of the king's face. That flash of fear. What had the old woman awakened in him? What had the stag woman seen that terrified an alpha king? And most importantly, could he survive long enough to find out? The moon rose, full and heavy, pulling at something deep inside him. Not a wolf, never a wolf, but something else. Something that whispered promises and warnings in equal measure. Something that was just beginning to wake up. Chapter 3, The Wolf That Wasn't. The competitors' camp sprawled across the meadow like a small village of ambition and desperation. Silk tents for the nobles, leather shelters for the warriors, and at the very edge, where the grass gave way to rough dirt and stones, Jack's threadbare canvas lean-to that barely kept out the wind. He sat outside it now, watching the other competitors celebrate their victories around roaring campfires. Wine flowed freely. Stories of the hunt were embellished with each retelling. Alliances were forming. He could see it in the way certain wolves gravitated toward each other, in the subtle exchanges of glances and nods. No one approached Jack's fire. He'd built it small, more for light than warmth, and sat alone with his thoughts. You're either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Jack looked up to find Sherry Nightshade standing at the edge of his firelight, 2 tin cups in her hands. She offered him one without waiting for permission to sit. "Can't it be both?" Jack asked, accepting the cup. The liquid inside smelled like spiced cider. Sherry laughed, a genuine sound that seemed out of place in this arena of calculated moves and hidden daggers. "Fair point. She settled onto a log across from him, studying him with those unsettling golden eyes. You've caused quite a stir, you know. The nobles are calling you a fraud. The warriors want to tear you apart to prove their dominance. And the king wants me gone. Jack finished quietly. Worse. He wants you broken. There's a difference. Sherry sipped her cider. I've been to enough royal courts to recognize that look. Aldrich doesn't just want you to fail, he wants you humiliated so thoroughly that no one will ever question his philosophy again. Why are you telling me this? Jack asked. Aren't we competitors? We are, Sherry agreed. But I'm not interested in crushing the weak to prove I'm strong. I'm here because my pack needs a voice in the capital, and marrying into the royal family is the fastest way to get it. She paused. What are you here for, Jack? Really? The question hung in the air. Jack stared into his cup, watching the firelight dance across the surface. Honestly, I don't know anymore, he admitted. At first, it was just defiance. Someone told me I could be more than what everyone said, and I wanted to believe her. But now you're in too deep to back out, Sherry finished. And tomorrow, the second trial will test the one thing you don't have. Your wolf. Jack's hands tightened around the cup. How do you know what the second trial is? Sherry's smile was wry. Because it's always the same. First trial tests your hunting skill, your ability to survive. Second trial tests your wolf, your connection to the pack magic that binds our kingdom together. Third trial tests your worthiness, your character, and judgment. She leaned forward. The second trial is designed to be impossible for someone like you. Someone wolfless, Jack said bitterly. Yes. Sherry didn't soften the truth. They'll ask you to shift, to demonstrate your wolf form, to prove your connection to the pack bonds. And when you can't. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Jack set down his cup, his appetite gone. Then I'll be marked with the shame brand and sent away. Unless, Sherry said slowly, there's another way. He looked up sharply. What do you mean? The rules say the trial tests your wolf. But what if? She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. What if the absence of a wolf isn't weakness? What if it's something else entirely? You sound like the old woman, Jack muttered. What old woman? He told her about the encounter in the forest, about the cryptic warnings and stranger promises. Sherry listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each word. Shadow seers, she breathed when he finished. I thought they were extinct. Shadow seers? Ancient magic users who existed before the wolf packs rose to power. They could see the truth beneath the surface, could read the patterns of fate and destiny. Sherry's eyes were wide now, almost frightened. The alphas hunted them to extinction 3 centuries ago because they threatened the pack hierarchy. If one of them spoke to you, then what? Jack pressed. Then you're not wolfless, Sherry said quietly. You're something the alphas thought they'd erased from history. Something they fear more than any rival pack. Before Jack could respond, a commotion erupted from the main camp. Shouts. The clash of metal. The snarls of shifted wolves. Both of them jumped to their feet, rushing toward the noise. In the center of the camp, 2 massive wolves circled each other, teeth bared and hackles raised. Jack recognized one immediately. Thorin Ironjaw's russet-colored beast, scarred and battle-hardened. The other was smaller but faster, a gray wolf with intelligent eyes. They're fighting over territory, someone in the crowd explained. Ironjaw claims the gray wolf Finn Swiftpaw stole his collar during the hunt. That's a lie. A voice shouted from the crowd. A young man, probably no older than 20, pushed forward. I earned my collar fairly. You're a thief and a coward. Thorin's human voice emerged from his wolf throat, distorted but understandable. I challenge you to. Trial by combat. Winner stays, loser leaves in disgrace. The crowd roared approval. This was pack law, ancient, brutal, final. Finn shifted back to human form, his face pale but determined. I accept. The circle widened. No one would interfere now. To do so would be to violate sacred pack law. The fight would continue until one submitted or died. It wasn't a fair fight. Finn was younger, smaller, less experienced. Thorin had decades of battle training and scars that proved he'd survived worse. The gray wolf tried to use speed, darting in and out, but Thorin was patient. He waited, absorbed the attacks, and when Finn overextended, the russet wolf's jaws clamped down on Finn's shoulder. Bone cracked, blood sprayed. Finn howled in agony. "Submit," someone in the crowd shouted. "Submit before he kills you." But Finn was too proud, or too stubborn. He twisted, trying to break free. And Thorin's jaws tightened. Another crack. Finn's whimper was heartbreaking. Jack moved before thinking. He pushed through the crowd, stepped into the circle, and the world exploded with pressure. Every wolf in the camp felt it. An aura that wasn't an aura. A presence that wasn't a presence. Something ancient and terrible and completely unlike pack magic. Thorin released Finn, stumbling backward. His wolf form flickered, as if the magic holding his shift was struggling. "Stop," Jack said, and his voice carried a weight he'd never possessed before. "This isn't combat, it's murder." Thorin shifted back to human form, his face twisted with rage. And was that fear? "You dare interfere with trial by combat, whelp? That's grounds for immediate banishment." "Then banish me," Jack said, surprised by his own calm. "But I won't stand here and watch you kill someone weaker than you just to feed your ego." The crowd erupted in chaos. Some wolves supported Thorin, shouting about pack law and tradition. Others surprisingly seemed shaken by what they'd felt emanate from Jack. "Enough." The word cut through the noise like a blade through silk. King Aldrich strode into the circle, his presence immediately dominating the space. His eyes fixed on Jack, with an intensity that should have been crushing. But Jack didn't bow, didn't look away. Something inside him, that strange, nameless thing, refused to submit. "You violated sacred pack law," Aldrich said, his voice dangerously soft. "Interfering in trial by combat. Do you understand the penalty?" "I understand that your sacred law is just an excuse for the strong to brutalize the weak," Jack replied, and the words came from somewhere deeper than thought. "I understand that you've built an entire kingdom on the idea that might makes right, and anyone who questions it must be destroyed." Gasps rippled through the crowd. No one spoke to the king like this. No one. Aldrich's aura pressed outward, a wave of alpha dominance that should have brought Jack to his knees, but that strange presence inside Jack rose to meet it, not fighting, not matching, but simply existing. Undeniable. Immovable. The king's eyes widened fractionally. "What are you?" "I don't know," Jack admitted, "but I'm starting to think you do." For a long moment, the entire camp held its breath. Aldrich and Jack stood facing each other, two opposing forces that shouldn't be able to coexist. Then Aldrich smiled. It was the most terrifying expression Jack had ever seen. "Very well. Since you violated pack law, I'll give you a choice. Accept immediate banishment." He paused, savoring the moment. "Or face the second trial tonight, right now. Before you have time to prepare, or plan, or run." The crowd murmured. Trials were supposed to be scheduled, structured, give competitors time to ready themselves. This was unprecedented. "And since you seem so concerned with fairness," Aldrich continued, "I'll modify the trial just for you. You don't need to demonstrate your wolf form. You simply need to survive 1 hour in the bonding circle with me." Horror rippled through the crowd. The bonding circle was where young wolves learned to submit to their alpha, where pack hierarchy was established through direct exposure to dominant auras. An hour in the circle with Aldrich, the most powerful alpha in the northern kingdoms, would break even experienced warriors. "Your Majesty," Sherry's voice cut through the shocked whispers. "That's not a trial. That's torture." "It's justice," Aldrich corrected coldly. "He violated pack law. This is his punishment, and his test combined." His eyes never left Jack's. "What do you say, boy? Banishment? Or do you have the courage to face what you've challenged?" Jack's mind raced. This was a trap. Aldrich was giving him an impossible choice: leave in disgrace or be broken publicly to prove that the king's way was the only way. But as he stood there, feeling that strange presence thrumming inside him, Jack realized something. The king wasn't just angry. He was desperate. Desperate to prove that his alpha dominance was absolute, that there was no other form of power, no other way to be. "I'll face the trial," Jack said quietly. The crowd erupted in shocked exclamations, but Aldrich just smiled wider. Excellent. Prepare the bonding circle. We begin in 10 minutes. As the king strode away, Sherry grabbed Jack's arm. Are you insane? He'll destroy you. An hour of direct alpha pressure from Aldrich will shatter your mind. Maybe, Jack agreed. But what if it doesn't? Then what? Then we'll know the old woman was right. Jack pulled free gently. That there's something inside me that even an alpha king can't break. He walked toward the bonding circle, feeling the weight of every eye on him. Finn Swiftpaw, still bleeding from his wounds, caught Jack's gaze and nodded a silent thank you. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind Jack why he was doing this. Not to win, not to prove anything to himself, but to show that mercy, compassion, and humanity were not weaknesses to be crushed. They were strengths that no amount of dominance could ever extinguish. The bonding circle awaited, and with it, the truth about what Jack truly was. Chapter 4. The Circle of Dominance. The bonding circle was ancient, older than the castle, older than the current pack hierarchy, older perhaps than the kingdom itself. Carved into a clearing of black stone, intricate runes formed concentric circles that pulsed with dormant magic. At the center stood 2 pillars of obsidian, positioned exactly 10 feet apart. Jack had heard stories about this place. Every wolf in the northern kingdoms knew them. This was where pack bonds were forged, where young wolves learned their place in the hierarchy, where challenges to alpha authority were settled without bloodshed. Without physical bloodshed, anyway. What it did to the mind and spirit was another matter entirely. Torches surrounded the circle now, casting dancing shadows across the gathered crowd. Every competitor had assembled to witness this. Some looked eager, hungry to see the wolfless boy broken. Others like Sherry and young Finn looked worried, guilty, as if they'd somehow caused this. King Aldrich stood at the circle's edge, stripped to the waist, his muscled torso covered in ritual tattoos that marked him as alpha. His eyes glowed faintly with wolf light, and his aura radiated outward in visible waves, a heat shimmer of pure dominance that made even the strongest warriors take involuntary steps backward. Jack approached from the opposite side, wearing only the simple linen pants they'd given him. His chest was bare, unmarked by any pack symbols or hierarchy tattoos. He looked painfully ordinary compared to the king's imposing presence. The rules are simple, announced Elder Moira, the oldest member of the council. Her voice was reedy, but carried authority. Both participants enter the circle. For 1 hour, the alpha will exert his full dominance. The challenger must remain standing, conscious, and in control of their faculties. If they fall, submit, or lose consciousness, they fail. She turned her milky eyes toward Jack. Child, this is your last chance to withdraw. There is no shame in recognizing one's limitations. Yes, there is. Aldrich said softly, dangerously. He's already broken pack law. The only question now is whether he's punished through banishment or through breaking. Choose, boy. Jack stepped forward. I've made my choice. Elder Moira sighed, a sound of deep sadness. Then let the trial begin. Jack entered the circle first. The moment his bare feet touched the carved stone, he felt it a thrumming energy that seemed to resonate with something deep inside him. The runes flared briefly, acknowledging his presence. Aldrich stepped in after him, and the circle's energy shifted dramatically. The runes blazed with silver light, responding to the Alpha King's power. The air itself seemed to thicken, pressing down with physical weight. Begin, Elder Moira, intoned. Aldrich's aura exploded outward like a tidal wave. Jack's knees buckled instantly. The pressure was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. Not just physical but mental, spiritual, attacking every part of his being simultaneously. It whispered in his mind, submit, bow, you are nothing, he is everything, resistance is pain, submission is peace. Around the circle, wolves instinctively dropped their heads, unable to meet the alpha's gaze even from outside the barrier. Some of the weaker ones fell to their knees, overwhelmed by proximity to such raw power. Jack's vision blurred. Blood roared in his ears. Every cell in his body screamed at him to bow, to submit, to make the pain stop. But somewhere beneath the agony, that strange presence stirred. The thing that wasn't a wolf. The thing that had made the stag woman smile. the thing that terrified the king. Stand, it whispered. Not a command. An invitation. Jack's legs trembled, but he pushed himself upright. Inch by agonizing inch, Aldrich's eyes narrowed. Impressive. Most wolves would already be unconscious. But you're not a wolf, are you, boy? So let's see how long that stubborn human pride lasts. The pressure doubled, then tripled. Jack gasped, falling to one knee. His vision went white at the edges. He could feel his mind starting to fray, thoughts scattering like leaves in a storm. You are nothing, the Alpha Aura whispered. Worthless, powerless. Give up, give in, sleep, let the pain end. And for a moment, Jack almost did. It would be so easy, so peaceful. Just let go, let the darkness take him, and wake up somewhere far from here, far from the judgment and the pain and the impossible expectations. But then he remembered Finn's grateful nod, the stag woman's words, your humanity, the old woman's challenge, show them their alpha means nothing. And something inside him, that nameless, formless thing, began to respond. It didn't push back against the Alpha Aura. That would have been futile, like trying to stop an ocean with bare hands. Instead, it did something stranger. It simply existed, sovereign, separate. A space inside Jack that the dominance couldn't touch because it operated on entirely different principles. Where the Alpha Aura demanded submission, this presence offered choice. Where the Alpha Aura crushed individuality, this presence celebrated uniqueness. Where the Alpha Aura was a hammer forcing everything into the same shape, this presence was water flowing around obstacles, filling spaces, adapting without losing its essential nature. Jack stood, fully, steadily. The crowd gasped. Aldrich's face contorted with something between rage and disbelief. Impossible. Is it? Jack's voice was strained but clear. Or have you just spent so long believing your way is the only way that you can't recognize anything else? You think you're special? Aldrich snarled, his aura intensifying further. The very stones of the circle began to crack under the pressure. You think whatever pathetic trick you're using makes you my equal? No, Jack said, and despite everything, he smiled. I'm not your equal. I'm something you don't have a category for. Something you can't dominate because domination isn't my language. The king moved forward, closing the distance between them. His physical presence was as overwhelming as his aura-solid muscle and battle-hardened grace. He stopped inches from Jack, close enough that Jack could see the silver flecks in his ice-blue eyes. I'm going to break you, Aldrich whispered, soft enough that only Jack could hear. Not because you're a threat, but because I cannot allow the Pax to see someone defy me and survive. Do you understand? This isn't personal, it's necessity. Everything about power is personal, Jack replied quietly. You just call it necessity, so you can sleep at night. Aldrich's hand shot out, gripping Jack's throat, not to strangle, but to establish physical dominance. His alpha aura concentrated, focusing like light through a lens, boring directly into Jack through the point of contact. This was different from the general pressure. This was targeted, invasive. It felt like claws digging into his mind, searching for the core of his identity, trying to tear it out and reshape it into something subservient. Jack screamed. He couldn't help it. The pain was beyond physical, beyond anything he'd ever imagined. But even as he screamed, that presence inside him grew stronger. It wrapped around his core self, protecting it, insulating it. And then, impossibly, it began to show him something. Memories. But not his own. He saw a young Aldrich, barely older than Jack, standing before the same council of elders. Saw him arguing passionately about reform, about changing the old ways, about finding balance between strength and compassion. Saw the elders laugh at him, mock him, tell him he was weak, idealistic, unfit to lead. Saw the moment Aldrich's face hardened. The moment he decided that if he couldn't change the system, he would master it, become it, use its own brutal logic to gain the power to. The memory shattered. Aldrich stumbled backward, releasing Jack's throat, his eyes wide with shock. What did you? You were like me once. Jack gasped, his throat burning. You believed in another way. Until they broke you. until you decided the only path to power was through their rules, their hierarchy, their cruelty. Shut up, Aldrich said, but his voice shook. That's why you're afraid of me, Jack continued, the words coming from that deep place inside him, the place that saw truth even when it hurt. Because I'm proof that you didn't have to become this, that there was another choice, and you can't bear to look at it. Shut up! The king's aura exploded outward with such force that the circle's protective runes blazed white-hot. Wolves outside the barrier were thrown backward. Even the elders stumbled. The pressure was beyond comprehension now. Jack felt his bones creaking, his organs compressing, his mind fracturing into pieces. He fell to his knees, then to his hands. His vision went black at the edges, red in the center. This was it, the breaking point, the end. Let go, the Alpha Aura commanded with the force of divine law. Submit. Sleep. Die. But that other presence, his presence, whispered something different. You are not alone. And suddenly, Jack felt them. Threads of connection, thin as spider silk but impossibly strong. They stretched out from him, touching every person watching who had ever felt powerless, who had ever been crushed by those stronger than them, who had ever wondered if mercy was weakness or strength. Finn Swiftpaw, nursing his broken shoulder. Sherry Nightshade, who fought for her pack's voice in a system that valued only martial strength. Even some of the warriors, who'd spent years pretending brutality was honor because the alternative was to admit they'd become monsters. All of them, connected to him, through him, lending him their hope, their desperate wish that anyone could prove that there was another way to be strong. Jack pushed himself up, first to his hands and knees, then to his knees. Then, he stood. Blood ran from his nose, his ears, the corners of his eyes. His entire body shook with the effort. But he stood, and the look on Aldrich's face was worth every ounce of pain. 1 hour, Elder Moira's voice rang out, sounding shocked for the first time in her ancient life. The trial is complete. The pressure vanished instantly as Aldrich released his aura. Jack collapsed. But he was conscious, aware, unbroken. He'd survived. The crowd erupted in chaos, shouts, arguments, wolves who couldn't believe what they'd just witnessed, but Jack heard none of it. He lay on the cold stone, feeling that strange presence settle back into dormancy, and smiled. If Jack's defiance moved you, please like this video. Because in that moment, as consciousness faded to the sound of arguing voices and Aldrich's retreating footsteps, Jack understood something fundamental. His power, if it could even be called power, wasn't about dominating others or bending them to his will. It was about refusing to be bent. About maintaining his humanity in a world that insisted humanity was weakness. And somehow, impossibly, that was the most terrifying thing the Alpha King had ever faced. When Jack woke, he was in the medical tent. Sherry sat beside his cot, her expression unreadable. How long? Jack croaked. 3 hours. You've been unconscious for 3 hours. She offered him water, which he drank gratefully. The second trial is tomorrow at noon. Aldrich postponed it, citing your condition. Condition? Officially, recovery from your trial by ordeal. Unofficially, Sherry's smile was grim. He needs time to figure out how to destroy you without making you a martyr. You've become complicated. Jack tried to sit up, and immediately regretted it. Every muscle screamed in protest. What do you mean? Jack, half the camp saw what happened in that circle. Saw you withstand an hour of Aldrich's full alpha pressure. Some are calling it a miracle. Others are calling it dark magic. But everyone is calling it something. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. You've made them question. And questions are dangerous to people like Aldrich. Good, Jack said, surprising himself with the vehemence in his voice. Let them question. Let them wonder if everything they've been taught about power and strength is actually true. Careful, Sherry warned. Aldrich won't try to break you with his aura again that didn't work. So he'll try something else. Something more insidious. Like what? Her golden eyes were troubled. I don't know. But whatever it is, it'll be designed to turn your greatest strength into your greatest weakness. Before Jack could ask what she meant, the tent flap opened. Finn Swiftpaw limped in, his shoulder bound in bandages, his face pale but determined. "I wanted to thank you," the young wolf said, kneeling awkwardly beside the cot. "For what you did, for stopping Thorin." "You don't need to kneel," Jack said softly. "That's kind of the whole point." Finn smiled, straightening. "I know, that's why I'm here. I'm withdrawing from the trials." "What? Why?" "Because I realized something watching you in that circle," Finn said. "I'm not fighting for love or honor or any noble reason. I'm fighting because I thought winning would prove I'm not weak. But you proved something better, that strength isn't about dominating others or refusing to submit. It's about knowing who you are and refusing to let anyone take that from you." He stood, clasping Jack's shoulder briefly. "Whatever happens in the next trial, know that you've already won something more important than the princess's hand. You've reminded us what we were before we became wolves, before we became predators." "What were we?" Jack asked. Finn smiled. "Human." He left, leaving Jack alone with Sherry and his thoughts. "2 trials down," Sherry said eventually. "1 to go." "What's the 3rd trial?" Jack asked, though part of him didn't want to know. "The judgment. You'll face 3 challenges designed to test your character, your morality, your worthiness to rule." She hesitated. "But Aldrich gets to design the challenges, which means they'll be designed specifically to break you, not physically, not mentally, but morally." "How do you break someone morally?" Sherry's expression was haunted. "By forcing them to choose between their principles and something they love, by making them prove that their compassion has limits, by showing everyone watching that given the right pressure, even the most virtuous person will compromise their values." Jack stared at the tent ceiling, his body aching, his mind racing. The king's fury couldn't stop what came next. But what came next might destroy everything Jack believed about himself. And deep inside, in that place where the nameless presence slept, he felt the first stirrings of genuine fear. Chapter 5, The Judgment Begins. Morning came too quickly. Jack woke to find his body still aching from the bonding circle, but functional. Someone had left fresh clothes outside his tent, simple but well-made, in the neutral gray that marked unaligned competitors, a small kindness in a place that had shown him precious little of it. The camp was quieter than before. Of the original 50 competitors, only 8 remained. Thorin Ironjaw had withdrawn after the incident with Finn, his reputation damaged by losing control. 3 others had failed to return from the Darkwood. The rest had been eliminated by various trials or chose to withdraw rather than face what came next. 8 wolves remained, 7 with their beasts, and Jack. As he emerged from his tent, he found a small crowd waiting. Not the entire camp, but a dozen or so wolves, mostly younger ones, lower ranked, the kind who understood what it meant to be at the bottom of the hierarchy. "We wanted you to know," said a young woman with kind eyes, "that what you did in the circle, it mattered. To us." "I didn't do anything special," Jack said, uncomfortable with the attention. "You didn't bow," said another wolf, older, with scars that spoke of hard-won survival. "When the most powerful alpha in the kingdoms demanded your submission, you didn't bow. That's everything to those of us who've spent our lives bowing." They left small gifts at his feet before dispersing a whetstone, a warm cloak, dried meat wrapped in cloth, tokens of respect from those who had nothing else to give. Jack gathered them carefully, his throat tight with emotion. He'd never had people support him before, never had anyone believe he was worth supporting. "You're building something dangerous," Sherry said, appearing at his elbow. She'd been watching from a distance. "A following. People who see you as a symbol of resistance against the old ways." "I don't want to be a symbol," Jack said. "I'm just trying to survive." "Those 2 things stopped being separate the moment you stood in that circle." She gestured toward the tournament grounds, where workers were constructing something elaborate. "Come on. The 3rd trial is about to be announced." They walked together through the camp, and Jack noticed the change immediately. Some wolves still sneered at him, still saw him as an abomination challenging the natural order, but others more than he'd expected nodded respectfully or stepped aside to let him pass. He'd become something he'd never intended to be, a question mark in a world that demanded certainty. The tournament grounds had been transformed overnight. 3 massive stages now dominated the space, each draped in black cloth and marked with different symbols. The first bore a scale justice. The second showed a crown leadership, The third displayed a heart sacrifice. King Aldrich stood before them all, Princess Ethel at his side. The remaining competitors assembled in a line facing the stages, with Jack at the far end physically separated from the others, as always. "The final trial," Aldrich announced, his voice carrying across the grounds. "The judgment. 3 challenges designed to test not your strength or your wolf, but your character. Your worthiness to lead, to rule, to stand beside my daughter as an equal." His eyes found Jack's, and something cold slithered through his smile. "Each challenge will present you with an impossible choice, a situation where there is no clear right answer, only different shades of wrong. How you choose and why will determine your fitness to rule." He paused, letting the weight settle. "The first challenge begins now." The black cloth dropped from the first stage, revealing an elaborate setup. 2 cages stood side by side, each containing a prisoner. On the left, a young woman barely 20, thin and terrified. On the right, an older man, gray-haired and dignified despite the chains. Between the cages stood a lever and an hourglass. "These are criminals," Aldrich explained, his voice emotionless. "The woman stole bread to feed her starving family. The man embezzled funds meant for the poor to line his own pockets. Both crimes carry the death penalty under our law." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This was old law, rarely enforced but technically still valid. "The challenge is simple," Aldrich continued. "Each competitor will pull the lever. When they do, 1 prisoner will be released, the other will be executed immediately. You must choose: save the desperate woman who broke the law out of love, or save the corrupt man whose theft was driven by greed." Horror washed over Jack. This wasn't a test of judgment, it was a test of cruelty. Forcing them to play executioner, to choose who lived and died based on impossible moral calculations. "Furthermore," Aldrich added, and his smile widened, "the prisoner you don't save will have their death attributed to you publicly. Their family will know your name. Their community will know you chose to let them die. This is the burden of leadership, making decisions that damn you in someone's eyes no matter what you choose." "This is barbaric," Sherry said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "These are people's lives." "These are criminals' lives," Aldrich corrected coldly. "And a leader must be willing to make hard choices, even when those choices cost lives. Even when those choices haunt them." His gaze swept across the competitors. "We begin with our first competitor. Sherry Nightshade, step forward." Sherry's jaw clenched, but she moved to the stage. She studied both prisoners, her expression unreadable. The woman wept silently. The man maintained his dignity, but fear flickered in his eyes. "Choose," Aldrich commanded. Sherry turned to face the king directly. "I refuse." Shocked silence. "Excuse me?" Aldrich's voice dropped dangerously low. "I refuse to participate in this obscenity. If that disqualifies me, so be it. But I won't play executioner to prove my fitness to rule." She stepped back from the lever. A true leader would find a third option: mercy, rehabilitation, something other than death. "There is no third option," Aldrich said. "That's the point. Leadership means choosing between bad options, not pretending better ones exist." "Then your version of leadership is tyranny dressed in pragmatism," Sherry replied. "And I want no part of it." Aldrich's expression darkened. "Very well. You are disqualified. The prisoners remain as they are until another competitor makes the choice you were too weak to make." Sherry walked past Jack, and he caught the whisper she left behind. "Don't compromise. Whatever he offers, don't compromise who you are." 4 more competitors made their choices. 2 saved the woman, rationalizing that desperate hunger was more forgivable than calculated greed. 2 saved the man, arguing that his crime, while worse, didn't justify execution while the woman's did. Each time, Aldrich made sure the competitor stood close enough to hear the condemned prisoner's final words, to watch the light leave their eyes. It was psychological torture disguised as justice. Finally, only 3 competitors remained. Jack and 2 wolves he barely knew, a scarred warrior named Rowan and a cunning noble named Lysandra. "Rowan Battleborn," Aldrich called. "Make your choice." Rowan approached the stage, his expression haunted. He studied both prisoners for a long moment, then pulled the lever toward the woman's cage. But before the mechanism could engage, he released it, pulled it toward the man, released it again. "I can't," he said finally, his voice breaking. Your Majesty, I can't choose. Both deserve mercy. Both deserve life. This isn't leadership, it's cruelty. Coward, Aldrich said simply. Disqualified. Rowan left the stage with his head bowed, but Jack saw relief in his eyes. Better to be called a coward than to become a murderer. Lysandra Silvermoon, the noble woman approached with calculated grace. She studied the prisoners clinically, as if they were assets on a balance sheet rather than human beings. The woman, she decided coolly, pulling the lever. The man's cage opened. He stumbled out, gasping with relief and gratitude. The woman's cage remained locked, and a mechanical whirring began. Poison gas started seeping into her enclosure. The woman screamed, pounding on the bars. Please, my children, who will feed my children? Jack moved before thinking. He lunged for the stage for the controls, desperate to stop this. Strong hands grabbed him. Guards materialized from nowhere, holding him back. Don't, Aldrich said softly, his voice carrying a warning. Interfere now, and you're disqualified. Is that what you want? To sacrifice your chance to change things for one life? The woman's screams grew weaker. The gas filled her cage completely. Then silence. Jack stopped struggling, his body shaking with rage and grief and helplessness. They released him, and he stood there, staring at the cage that now held a corpse, feeling something inside him break and reform into something harder, sharper. Your turn, Aldrich said. Jack of no pack. Make your choice. The workers removed the woman's body and the freed man from the stage. Then they brought out 2 new cages, 2 new prisoners. But these weren't strangers. On the left, Finn Swiftpaw, the young wolf Jack had saved from Thorin. His shoulder was still bandaged, his face pale with fear and confusion. On the right, the old woman from the forest. The shadow seer, who had set Jack on this impossible path. No, Jack whispered. Yes, Aldrich replied, satisfaction dripping from his voice. You see, I've been investigating you, boy. Found it curious how a wolfless orphan suddenly developed such unusual abilities. So I searched. And I found this woman lurking in the forest, spreading her poisonous ideas about other forms of power. The old woman met Jack's eyes. She showed no fear, only infinite sadness. The boy, Aldrich continued, gesturing to Finn, violated pack law by withdrawing from the trials after the first challenge. Such cowardice requires punishment traditionally, exile or death. The woman is a shadow seer, last of a bloodline we thought extinct. Her very existence violates the purification laws established 3 centuries ago. She should have been executed the moment we discovered her. Jack's hands clenched into fists. They've done nothing wrong, haven't they? Aldrich moved closer. The boy inspired others to question, to doubt, to wonder if mercy is more important than strength. The woman filled your head with dangerous ideas about alternative forms of power. Both are threats to the stability of our kingdom. Both deserve punishment under our laws. Your laws are unjust, Jack said. Perhaps, but there's still the law, and a leader must enforce the law, even when it pains them, even when it seems unjust. Aldrich's smile was razor sharp. So choose, Jack. Save the boy who believed in you, who thanked you for showing him another way, or save the woman who started you on this path, who woke whatever sleeps inside you. There has to be another option, Jack said desperately. There isn't. There never is. That's what you still don't understand. Leadership isn't about finding perfect solutions, it's about choosing which imperfect solution you can live with. Aldrich leaned closer. Choose. Or I'll execute them both and disqualify you for cowardice like the others. Jack looked at Finn. The young wolf was trying to be brave, but tears streamed down his face. It's okay, Finn said softly. I understand. Whatever you choose. Then he looked at the old woman. She smiled at him, serene despite the circumstances. The answer isn't in the choice they're forcing you to make, she said, her voice carrying across the silent grounds. It's in refusing to play by their rules at all. There are no other rules. Aldrich roared, his composure finally cracking. This is reality. This is what power requires. Choose, damn you, or prove that your compassion is just weakness wearing a prettier mask. Jack stared at the lever, at the 2 cages, at the impossible choice, and then, slowly, he smiled. You're right, he said quietly. Leadership requires hard choices. Choices that damn you in someone's eyes. Choices that haunt you. He walked to the lever, placed his hand on it. So I choose. He pulled the lever not toward either cage, but straight back, yanking it completely out of the mechanism. Sparks flew. The magical enchantments shorting out with shrieks of disrupted energy. Both cages sprung open simultaneously. The crowd erupted in chaos. Guards rushed forward, but Jack was already moving. He reached both prisoners, helping them out of the cages before anyone could react. "Seize him!" Aldrich bellowed. "He's violated the trial, disqualified." "Arrest him for what?" Jack shouted back, and that strange presence inside him surged, lending his voice a weight that carried across the entire grounds. "For refusing to murder innocent people to satisfy your twisted idea of leadership? For choosing a third option when you said there wasn't one? For proving that maybe, just maybe, your way isn't the only way?" He stood between Finn and the old woman. Arms spread, protecting them with his body if not with power. "You wanted to test my judgment," Jack continued. "Well, here it is. I judge your trial a farce. I judge your laws that require death for desperate survival to be unjust. I judge a system that forces leaders to become executioners, to be fundamentally broken." The silence that followed was absolute. Aldrich's face was purple with rage, his aura pressed outward, and wolves throughout the crowd fell to their knees. But Jack stood firm. That presence inside him meeting the Alpha's fury with quiet, unshakable resistance. "You are disqualified," Aldrich said, each word forced through clenched teeth. "You have violated the sacred trials. You will be marked with the shame brand, and banished." "No." Princess Ethel's voice cut through her father's decree. She stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "No?" Aldrich repeated, turning his fury on his daughter. "Ethel, this isn't. The trials are meant to test worthiness to rule beside me," Ethel interrupted, her voice steady despite the weight of her father's glare. "And I decide what makes someone worthy. Not you, not the elders, me." She walked to Jack, stopping directly in front of him. Up close, her eyes were complex, not just the ice blue she'd inherited from her father but flecks of warmer amber, like her mother's. "What you just did," she said quietly, "was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever witnessed. You threw away your chance at power to save two people who, by law, deserved punishment. You broke the rules, destroyed the trial, and humiliated my father in front of the entire court." Jack met her gaze evenly. "If that's what it takes to do the right thing, I'd do it again." Something flickered in her expression: surprise, respect, fear. "I know," she said. Then louder, turning to address the crowd. "Jack passes the first challenge. His judgment is that mercy matters more than law, compassion more than compliance. Some will call that weak. I call it what a true leader needs: the courage to remake the rules when the rules themselves become unjust." The crowd exploded into arguments. Wolves shouted support, others shouted outrage. The remaining competitor, Lysandra, looked furious at this unexpected development. But Aldrich's expression was beyond fury now. It was cold calculation, the look of someone whose first strategy has failed and who's already planning the next attack. "Very well," he said softly, dangerously. "If my daughter believes this spectacle demonstrates worthiness, then so be it. The boy passes. But there are 2 challenges remaining, and they will be considerably more revealing." He turned and strode from the grounds, elders scrambling to follow. Ethel lingered a moment longer. "You made an enemy of the most powerful alpha in the kingdoms today," she said quietly. "I hope you understand what that means." "I made a friend of my conscience," Jack replied. "I'll take that trade." She smiled a real smile, not the carefully constructed one she wore at court. "We'll see if you still think so after the next challenge." Then she too departed, leaving Jack alone with Finn, the old woman, and Sherry, who'd pushed through the crowd to reach them. "That," Sherry said, "was the most magnificent act of self-destruction I've ever witnessed. You do realize he's going to make the next 2 challenges specifically designed to break you now?" "Let him try," Jack said, surprised by how calm he felt. "I'm done playing by rules designed to turn me into something I'm not." The old woman placed her hand on his shoulder. "You're learning. faster than I dared hope. But Sherry is right. What comes next will test you in ways the bonding circle never did. Aldrich will try to turn your greatest strength against you. My humanity? Jack asked. Your compassion, she corrected. He'll show you that compassion has limits. That eventually, everyone chooses who's worth saving and who isn't. And when you make that choice, when you prove you're just as willing to sacrifice some people for others, he'll have won. Then I won't make that choice, Jack said stubbornly. The old woman's smile was infinitely sad. Oh, child, that's exactly what everyone says. Until the moment they do. She faded into the crowd, leaving Jack with the uncomfortable certainty that the worst was yet to come. The king's fury couldn't stop what came next. But what came next might prove that Jack was just as capable of cruelty as any alpha he'd just been lucky enough not to be tested yet. And in 2 days, when the second challenge began, that luck would run out. Chapter 6. The Price of Mercy. 2 days passed in uneasy peace. Jack spent them in a strange limbo, neither fully part of the competitor's camp nor entirely separate from it. The guards watched him constantly, but no one moved to arrest or banish him. Aldrich's fury had gone underground, which somehow felt more dangerous than his open rage. Finn recovered in the medical tent, his shoulder healing slowly but steadily. He spoke to anyone who would listen about what Jack had done, turning the wolfless boy into something between a folk hero and a dangerous revolutionary, depending on who was listening. The old woman who finally introduced herself as Miriam, last keeper of the Shadow Path, visited Jack each night. She taught him exercises to strengthen that presence inside him, to understand it better. Not to control it, that was alpha thinking, but to harmonize with it, to let it flow through him naturally. It's not power you're developing, she explained one evening as they sat by his small fire. It's consciousness, awareness, the ability to see the world as it truly is, rather than through the lens of dominance and submission that wolf culture forces on everyone. But what good is seeing clearly if I can't change anything? Jack asked, frustration creeping into his voice. Aldrich still rules, his laws still govern. And after the trials end, whether I win or lose, nothing fundamental will have changed. Miriam's smile was enigmatic. Won't it? You've already changed more than you realize. Every wolf who watched you refuse to choose in that trial now carries a seed of doubt. Every person who saw you stand in the bonding circle now knows that alpha dominance isn't absolute. Seeds, Jack. You're planting seeds. Seeds take time to grow, Jack muttered. And I might not survive long enough to see them sprout. Then we'd better make sure you survive. She stood, preparing to leave. The second challenge begins tomorrow. Be ready. And remember, Aldrich learns from his mistakes. He won't try to break you with impossible moral choices again. This time, he'll make the choice feel obvious, feel right. And that's when you'll be in the most danger. She disappeared into the darkness, leaving Jack alone with his thoughts and his fears. Dawn came gray and cold, with clouds that promised rain but refused to deliver. The tournament grounds had been transformed again. Where the 3 stages had stood, now there was only one massive platform. On it sat a single throne, not ornate like the king's throne, but simple, made of dark wood and iron. Behind the throne stood 10 figures, hooded and bound, their identities hidden. Jack's stomach dropped. Whatever this challenge was, it involved more prisoners, more impossible choices. Only 2 competitors remained now, Jack and Lysandra Silvermoon. The noble woman stood on the opposite side of the grounds, her expression cool and calculating. She'd spent the past 2 days courting favor with the elders, making it clear that she understood and supported the traditional hierarchy. She was everything Aldrich wanted in a future ruler, everything Jack wasn't. Competitors, Elder Moira announced, her reedy voice carrying across the assembled crowd. The second challenge of the judgment tests your ability to prioritize. A ruler must make decisions that affect thousands, and sometimes those decisions require sacrifice. The hooded figures were pushed forward, arranged in a line before the throne. Before you stand 10 individuals, Moira continued. Each represents a different pillar of our society. Their identities will be revealed shortly. Your task is simple. Sit upon the throne and choose 5 to save. The other 5 will be executed immediately. Gasps rippled through the crowd. This was more brutal than the first challenge, not choosing between 2 but determining the fate of 10. Furthermore, Moira added, you must justify your choices. Explain why the 5 you save are more valuable to the kingdom than the 5 you condemn. Your reasoning will be judged as carefully as your decision." Aldrich stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "We begin with Lysandra Silvermoon. Make your choice." Lysandra approached the throne with practiced grace, settling into it as if she'd been born to rule. Guards removed the hoods from the 10 prisoners, revealing their faces. Jack's heart sank as he recognized several of them. A farmer, weathered and honest-faced. A blacksmith, muscular and scarred from his forge. A scholar, elderly and frail. A healer, middle-aged with kind eyes. A merchant, well-dressed and calculating. A soldier, young and proud. A priest, serene despite the circumstances. A mother with an infant in her arms. An artist, paint-stained hands trembling. And a child no more than 10 years old, eyes wide with terror. "Choose," Aldrich commanded. Lysandra studied them all with cold efficiency. Then she spoke, her voice clear and unwavering. "I save the soldier. We need warriors to defend our borders. The blacksmith weapons and tools are essential. The healer medical knowledge is irreplaceable. The scholar wisdom guides policy. And the merchant trade sustains our economy." She paused, then added almost as an afterthought. "The farmer grows food, but any peasant can farm. The priest offers comfort but no tangible value. The artist creates beauty but no necessity. The mother and child are tragic but represent only 2 futures versus the guaranteed value of productive members of society." Her logic was flawless. Brutal, but flawless. "And yet," she continued, meeting Aldrich's eyes, "I would make one substitution. I would save the child instead of the priest. Not for sentimental reasons, but because a child represents potential future labor, future loyalty, the future strength. The priest has already given whatever he had to offer." Aldrich nodded slowly, a smile playing at his lips. Logical, practical, the reasoning of a ruler who understands that sentiment cannot outweigh necessity. He turned to the guards. "Execute her selections." "No, wait." The priest stepped forward. "Please. I can still serve. I can." The guard's sword ended his plea. One by one, the condemned were executed. The priest, the farmer, the artist, the mother clutching her infant. Each death swift but no less horrifying for its efficiency. The crowd watched in numb silence. This wasn't justice. It wasn't even cruelty. It was something worse. It was calculation, cold and clean and utterly devoid of humanity. When it was done, 5 bodies lay on the platform. 5 survivors stood trembling, grateful and guilty in equal measure. Lysandra rose from the throne, her expression unchanged. She'd just condemned 5 people to death and felt nothing. Or if she felt something, she'd learned to bury it so deep that it might as well not exist. "Excellent," Aldrich said. "You understand the burden of leadership, the necessity of sacrifice, the importance of prioritizing the kingdom's needs over individual lives." He turned to Jack. "Now let's see if our revolutionary can make the same hard choices he criticizes others for making." Jack of Nopak approach. Jack's legs felt like lead as he walked toward the throne. The bodies were being removed, but blood still stained the platform. The 5 survivors were led away and replaced with 10 new hooded figures, 10 new lives in his hands. He sat on the throne, and it felt like sitting on a blade's edge. The wood was cold beneath him, the iron armrests like shackles. "Remove the hoods," Aldrich commanded. The guards obeyed, and Jack's world shattered, because standing before him, bound and helpless, were people he knew, people who'd shown him kindness in a world that offered precious little of it. Sherry Nightshade stood first in line, her golden eyes meeting his with understanding. Beside her, Finn Swiftpaw, still recovering from his injuries. Then the young woman from the camp who'd given him the whetstone, the scarred warrior who'd called him brave, the cook who'd always saved him extra portions, and 5 others, servants, guards, common wolves who'd dared to show him respect or support, everyone who'd believed in him, everyone who'd stood by him, everyone who'd dared to see him as more than worthless. "Your supporters," Aldrich said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "The wolves who've been foolish enough to think your philosophy of mercy and compassion could work in the real world. Choose 5 to save, Jack." Choose which of your faithful followers are worth keeping alive. The trap was perfect, elegant, devastating. If Jack chose, he proved that his compassion had limits that when forced to prioritize. He was no different from Lysandra, or any other ruler who valued some lives over others. If he refused, he condemned all 10 to death for his own moral purity, proving that his principles mattered more to him than the people who believed in them. "This is obscene," Jack said, his voice shaking. "They've done nothing wrong. Their only crime is showing me kindness." "Their crime," Aldrich corrected, "is supporting sedition, is encouraging a philosophy that threatens the stability of the kingdom, is choosing loyalty to a wolfless boy over loyalty to their alpha." He leaned closer. "But I'm feeling generous. Choose 5, and I'll spare them. Refuse, and all 10 die. Their blood will be on your hands, boy. On your conscience. Your precious compassion will have killed them." Jack looked at each face. Sherry, who'd warned him about this exact scenario. Finn, who'd thanked him for showing another way. The others, whose names he barely knew but who'd offered him dignity when the world offered only scorn. "Jack," Sherry said softly. "It's okay. We knew what we were risking. We chose this." "Don't you dare," Jack said, his voice breaking. "Don't you dare act like dying for me is noble. It's not. It's just more senseless death in a kingdom that's forgotten the difference between strength and cruelty." "Then make the choice," Aldrich said. "Or prove that your mercy is just cowardice. That you'd rather let people die than sully your pure conscience with the hard decisions leadership requires." Jack closed his eyes. Inside him, that presence stirred, not offering answers, but offering awareness, clarity. The ability to see what was really happening here. This wasn't about testing his judgment. This was about destroying him. Aldrich had already won against Lysandra. She'd proven herself a perfect ruler for his vision of the kingdom, cold and calculating and willing to sacrifice anyone for the greater good. But Jack represented something dangerous. The possibility that there might be another way. And the only way to eliminate that possibility was to force Jack to prove he was either a hypocrite or a fool. Either he chose, demonstrating that his compassion had limits, or he refused, proving his principles were more important than people's lives. Both options destroyed what he represented. Unless... Jack opened his eyes and stood from the throne. "I choose," he said clearly. Relief flooded Aldrich's face, quickly masked, but there nonetheless. "Go on." "I choose all 10. Silence. "That's not," Aldrich started. "All 10, Jack interrupted, his voice growing stronger as that presence inside him surged. "I choose to save every single one of them. And before you tell me that's not an option, let me make something very clear." He stepped down from the throne, walking past Aldrich to address the crowd directly. "This isn't a trial of judgment. It's a charade. A performance designed to prove that cruelty is necessary, that compassion must have limits, that anyone who claims otherwise is naive or foolish. But you're wrong. Not because I think mercy is free or easy, but because I understand something you've forgotten." His voice carried across the silent grounds, amplified by something beyond mere sound. "Every time you force someone to choose who lives and who dies, you're not testing their judgment, you're normalizing murder. You're teaching them to see people as resources to be calculated, rather than lives to be valued. And over time, that calculus becomes easier. Until one day, you're Lysandra, executing 5 people without even blinking. Or you're Aldrich, designing elaborate games where the only way to win is to compromise your humanity." He turned back to the king. "So I refuse. Not because I'm too pure or too naive to make hard choices, but because this choice itself is unjust. These people's lives aren't bargaining chips. They're not test subjects. They're human beings who deserve to live, and I won't participate in a system that treats them as anything less." "Then they all die," Aldrich said coldly. "Guards, stop." Princess Ethel's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. She descended from the royal platform, her mother's influence evident in the authority she carried. "Father, this has gone far enough. Ethel, stay out of..." "No." She stood between Jack and the prisoners, her posture regal and unyielding. "These trials are meant to determine my future consort, which means I have final say over what constitutes worthiness. And I say that forcing Jack to execute his own supporters crosses the line from testing into tyranny. The crowd erupted in whispers. This was unprecedented, the princess openly defying the king's authority. Aldrich's face darkened with fury. You would undermine me? In front of the entire court? I would remind you, Ethel replied, her voice steady despite the weight of her father's glare, that these trials are my trials, my future, my choice, and I choose to declare this challenge void. She turned to Jack. You pass. Not because you chose correctly, but because you refused to legitimize a test that was designed to have no right answer. That takes wisdom, not weakness. Ethel, Aldrich said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. If you continue down this path, you'll regret it. Perhaps. She met his eyes without flinching. But I'd regret becoming the kind of ruler who needs to torture people to prove she's strong even more. For a moment, father and daughter stared at each other, and something fundamental shifted in the air. An old order cracking. A new possibility emerging. Then Aldrich turned and stalked away, his aura lashing out in furious waves that sent wolves stumbling. The elders scrambled to follow, their expressions troubled. Ethel gestured to the guards. Release them, all of them. The guards hesitated, looking to their commanding officer. He looked to the departing king's back, then to the princess, then made a choice. Release the prisoners. The 10 were unbound, stumbling away from the platform in shock and relief. Sherry caught Jack's eye and mouthed, "Thank you." But Jack didn't feel victorious. He felt exhausted, sick, furious at a world that required such battles, just to prevent senseless death. Ethel approached him, close enough to speak privately. That was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Can't it be both? Jack asked, echoing his earlier conversation with Sherry. She smiled slightly. You've made an enemy of my father in a way that might be irreparable. He sees you as a threat now, not just to his authority, but to everything he's built. The kingdom he's created, the philosophy he's established. You represent the possibility that it was all wrong, all unnecessary. Was it? Jack asked quietly. Ethel's expression was complex conflict warring in her ice blue eyes. I don't know. I was raised to believe his way was the only way. That strength through dominance was natural law, but watching you these past days. She trailed off, as if afraid to finish the thought. There's one challenge left, she said instead. The final trial. And Father will make it impossible. He'll make it something you literally cannot refuse or survive. Because if you succeed, if you win, it proves everything he believes is a lie. What do you want? Jack asked. Really? Not what your father wants, or what the kingdom expects. What do you want, Ethel? She looked at him for a long moment, and for the first time, he saw past the princess to the person beneath. Young. Uncertain. Trapped between who she was raised to be and who she might choose to become. I want, she said slowly, to believe that a kingdom can be built on something other than fear. That strength can come from lifting people up rather than holding them down. That maybe, just maybe, my father is wrong. She stepped back, resuming her royal bearing. But wanting and believing are different things. The final trial will test whether your way can actually work. Not in theory, not in principle, but in brutal, undeniable reality. When? Jack asked. 3 days. That's how long Father needs to design something that will finally break you. Her smile was sad. Use that time well, Jack. Because whatever comes next won't be like anything you've faced before. She left, and Jack stood alone on the blood-stained platform, surrounded by the evidence of how close he'd come to becoming exactly what he opposed. Miriam appeared at his side, silent as shadow. You did well. I didn't do anything, Jack said bitterly. Ethel saved them, not me. You gave her the courage to act, to step out from her father's shadow and make her own choice. The old woman placed her hand on his shoulder. That's how change happens, Jack. Not through grand gestures or heroic victories, but through ordinary people finding the courage to say no when the world demands their compliance. What's he going to do? Jack asked. In the final trial? Miriam's expression darkened. Something worse than forcing you to choose who lives. He's going to make you choose whether your way can actually protect anyone. He's going to prove that compassion without power is just words, that mercy without strength is just foolishness. How? By making you responsible for consequences you can't control. She looked up at the gray sky. And when people die because you chose mercy over pragmatism, he'll make sure everyone knows it's your fault. Your failure. Your philosophy's fatal flaw. Jack felt cold settle into his bones. Then how do I win? You don't, Miriam said simply. That's the point. You can't win on his terms. The only way forward is to change what winning means. She faded into the dispersing crowd, leaving Jack with 3 days to figure out how to survive the impossible. The king's fury couldn't stop what came next. But what came next might prove that fury was justified all along. Chapter 7. The Impossible Choice. 3 days passed like sand through an hourglass, too slow and too fast simultaneously. Jack spent them in a state of anxious preparation, though preparing for an unknown trial felt like trying to catch smoke with bare hands. Miriam visited each night, teaching him more about the presence inside him. It's not power, she repeated patiently. It's perspective, the ability to see beyond the binary of dominance and submission, to recognize that there are always more options than the ones authority presents you with. But what if there aren't? Jack asked on the second night, frustration bleeding into his voice. What if Aldrich designs something where there truly is no third option? Where people die no matter what I choose? Then people die, Miriam said bluntly. And you'll have to live with that. The difference between you and Aldrich isn't that you can prevent all death, it's that you'll grieve it. You'll remember that each life mattered. You won't let it become just numbers on a ledger. It wasn't comforting, but it was honest. Sherry found him on the third afternoon, sitting by the edge of the forest where all this had begun. The final trial is announced for dawn tomorrow, she said, settling beside him. The entire kingdom has been invited to witness. This isn't just about the trials anymore, it's become something bigger. I know, Jack said quietly. It's about whether the old way can be challenged. Whether someone like me, someone powerless in traditional terms, can offer a viable alternative. No pressure, Sherry said dryly. Then, more seriously, Jack, I need you to understand something. Whatever happens tomorrow, you've already accomplished more than you realize. Half the kingdom is questioning things they never questioned before. Wolves are having conversations about mercy, about justice, about whether might really does make right. And the other half wants me dead for daring to question it all. Jack finished. True. But change was never going to be comfortable. She stood, preparing to leave. For what it's worth, I believe in what you're trying to do. Even if it gets you killed, it'll be worth it. Not exactly the inspirational speech I was hoping for, Jack muttered. Sherry laughed. Would you prefer I lie and tell you everything will work out? You're too smart for comfortable lies, Jack. The truth is uglier but more useful. She left, and Jack sat alone in the gathering darkness, trying to quiet his racing mind enough to find some semblance of peace. He didn't find it, but he found acceptance, which was close enough. Dawn broke blood red, the sun rising through clouds that promised storm. The tournament grounds had been transformed one final time into something that resembled an amphitheater, rising tiers of seating surrounding a massive central arena. Thousands had gathered, far more than had witnessed the previous trials. This was history in the making, and everyone wanted to see how it ended. Jack walked to the arena alone. No friends accompanied him now. Aldrich had made sure of that, isolating him to maximize the psychological pressure. Only competitors and officials were allowed on the grounds. Lysandra already waited at the opposite end of the arena, her expression confident. She'd won her challenges through cold logic and pragmatic ruthlessness. She was everything the old order valued. King Aldrich stood at the center of the arena, his presence dominating despite the vast space. Elder Moira and the council flanked him, with Princess Ethel positioned slightly apart, present but separate. A physical manifestation of her growing distance from her father's philosophy. Citizens of the northern kingdoms. Aldrich's voice boomed, magically amplified to reach every ear. We gather to witness the final trial, the ultimate test of worthiness to rule beside Princess Ethel and, one day, to lead our people. He gestured, and guards wheeled out a massive glass sphere easily 20 feet in diameter. Inside, Jack could see movement. People. His stomach dropped. This trial tests not judgment or courage or conviction, Aldrich continued, but results. Because leadership is ultimately measured not by intentions, but by outcomes. By whether your choices actually protect the people you claim to care about. The glass sphere was positioned at the center of the arena, and now Jack could see its contents clearly. Inside were 30 people, men, women, children of various ages. Common wolves. Peasants. The kind of people who never attended royal trials because they were too busy surviving. These individuals, Aldrich explained, are volunteers from the poorest districts of the kingdom. Each has been promised a year's wages for their family if they participate in this trial. They entered willingly, understanding the risks. Jack's eyes narrowed. Volunteers who were desperate enough to risk their lives for money weren't really volunteers, they were victims of a system that left them no better options. The challenge is simple, Aldrich said. Each competitor will be given a puzzle. Solve it correctly within the time limit, and the people in the sphere are released unharmed. Fail, and they die. The competitor whose solution is most effective, who saves the most people with the least collateral damage, wins. He paused, letting that sink in. Lysandra Silvermoon will go first. Guards wheeled out a second sphere, identical to the first, also filled with 30 people, 2 spheres, 60 lives hanging in the balance. Each puzzle is unique, Aldrich continued. Tailored to test your specific weaknesses. Lysandra, your puzzle tests efficiency under pressure. Jack, yours tests something else entirely. Lysandra approached her sphere confidently. A platform appeared before it with various levers, buttons, and controls, a complex mechanism that presumably controlled the sphere's fate. Your puzzle, Aldrich told her, is called the trolley problem. It's an ancient philosophical question with a simple premise. He gestured to the sphere. Inside are 30 people. A poison will be released in 5 minutes that will kill them all. However, you can divert the poison to a different chamber, a smaller one, visible here. A second, smaller glass chamber materialized beside the sphere. Inside were 5 people, all elderly, all looking resigned to their fate. Pull the lever, Aldrich said. And you save 30 at the cost of 5. Don't pull it, and all 35 die. The math is simple. The moral calculation clear. What do you choose? Lysandra didn't hesitate. She pulled the lever. The smaller chamber filled with green gas. The 5 elderly people inside convulsed, struggled, died. It was over in less than a minute, efficient, horrible, final. The 30 in the larger sphere were released, stumbling out, gasping and crying and alive. Well done, Aldrich said. You saved 30 lives at the cost of 5. A net gain of 25. A ruler must be willing to make such calculations, to sacrifice the few for the many. Efficient, pragmatic, correct. He turned to Jack, and his smile was razor-sharp with anticipation. Now, let's see how our champion of mercy handles a real test of his principles. Jack approached his sphere, his heart hammering. Inside, the 30 people looked terrified but hopeful, as if his reputation for mercy might somehow save them. That hope felt like acid in his throat. Your puzzle, Aldrich announced, is called the reverse trolley. It operates on the same principle, but with a critical difference. He gestured to Jack's sphere. These 30 people will die in 5 minutes unless you act. However, the only way to save them is to sacrifice one specific person. A smaller chamber appeared, not beside the sphere, but slightly behind Jack. He turned slowly. Dread building. Inside stood Miriam, the old shadow seer who'd set him on this path, who'd taught him about the presence inside him, who'd shown him that there was another way to be strong. No, Jack whispered. Yes, Aldrich said, satisfaction dripping from his voice. Pull the lever, and this creature dies. The poison meant for the 30 is diverted to her chamber. Don't pull it. And they all die, including her. Either way, she's doomed. The only question is whether you're willing to actively kill her to save the others. Jack's mind raced. This isn't a test of leadership, it's murder. It's necessity. Aldrich corrected. She's already condemned. We discovered weeks ago that she's a shadow seer, which carries an automatic death sentence under the purification laws. Her execution was scheduled regardless of these trials. I'm simply offering you a choice. Let her death be meaningless, or use it to save 30 innocent lives. The trap was perfect. Again. Always. If Jack pulled the lever, he actively killed the one person who'd believed in him, who'd shown him another way, proving that his mercy had limits, that he'd sacrifice one person to save many, just like any pragmatic ruler. If he refused, 30 people died for his moral purity, proving that his principles mattered more than actual lives, that his compassion was just selfishness in disguise. Jack. Miriam's voice carried from the chamber, calm despite her circumstances. Listen to me. This is exactly what I warned you about. He's trying to make you play by his rules, to accept his framing of the choice. There are 30 people who will die if I don't pull that lever, Jack said, his voice breaking. And there are thousands more who will live under Aldrich's brutality if you prove his way is right, Miriam replied. Sometimes, the most merciful choice is to refuse the choice itself. But they'll die, Jack shouted. All of them, including you. Then we die standing for something, Miriam said gently, rather than living as proof that compassion doesn't work, that mercy is just pretty words until real stakes appear, that Aldrich's way is the only way that produces results. The crowd murmured. Some shouted at Jack to pull the lever, to save the 30. Others remained silent, understanding the deeper implications. Aldrich's voice cut through the noise. You have 4 minutes, boy. Choose. Actively kill the old woman, and save 30 lives. Or refuse and let them all die for the sake of your precious principles. Show us whether your mercy is real or just cowardice wrapped in flowery philosophy. Jack stared at the lever. At the 30 terrified faces in the sphere. At Miriam's serene expression in her chamber. Inside him, that presence stirred, not offering answers, but offering clarity, the ability to see what was really happening here. This wasn't about saving lives. It was about proving a point. Aldrich had designed a scenario where the only way to save people was to embrace his philosophy, to accept that mercy must have limits, that hard choices require hard hearts, that pragmatism trumps principles. If Jack played by those rules, even if he won, Aldrich had already won the larger war. But if Jack refused, 3 minutes, Aldrich announced. Jack closed his eyes, reached deep inside himself to that place where the presence lived, and asked the question that mattered. What would actually change things? Not just save these lives, but challenge the system that makes such choices necessary in the first place. The answer came not in words but in understanding. He opened his eyes and walked away from the lever. What are you doing? Aldrich demanded. I'm refusing, Jack said clearly. Not because I don't care about those 30 lives, but because I won't legitimize a system that treats human beings as bargaining chips in philosophical arguments. He turned to address the crowd directly, his voice carrying with that strange resonance. Every single person in these spheres is here because our kingdom's laws and economics left them desperate enough to volunteer for this. They're here because poverty and powerlessness made risking death seem like a reasonable trade for feeding their families. And now I'm supposed to decide who deserves to live based on what. What calculus makes Miriam's life less valuable than 30 others? The calculus of mathematics, Aldrich said coldly. 1 versus 30. The answer is obvious to anyone capable of rational thought. The answer is obvious to anyone who's learned to see people as numbers, Jack countered. But they're not numbers. They're human beings. And the real question isn't which of them should die, it's why we've built a society where this choice needs to exist at all. 2 minutes, Aldrich announced, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. The 30 people in the sphere were sobbing now, begging Jack to save them. Their pleas tore at his heart, but he stood firm. I won't pull that lever, Jack said, not because I'm pure or noble or better than anyone else, but because the moment I accept the premise of this choice that some lives are worth more than others, that killing one to save many is justified, I become part of the problem. I become another ruler who looks at people and sees calculations instead of souls. Then they die because of your ego, Aldrich snarled. Because your need to feel morally superior matters more than their actual survival. How is that mercy, boy? How is that compassion? 1 minute, Elder Moira intoned, her voice shaking. Jack met Miriam's eyes across the distance. She smiled at him, proud, sad, understanding. I'm sorry, he whispered, though he didn't know who he was apologizing to anymore. The 30 who would die? Miriam? Himself? Don't be, Miriam called back. You're doing exactly what needs to be done. You're refusing to make their game playable. Sometimes revolution requires sacrifice. Sometimes mercy means accepting that you can't save everyone, but you can refuse to participate in systems that demand you choose. 30 seconds, Aldrich said, and now he was smiling. Victory, he'd won. He'd proven that Jack's compassion was just impotent philosophy, that when faced with real stakes, mercy crumbled. Jack stood before the lever, hands at his sides, watching the timer count down. 20 seconds. The 30 people screamed, pleaded, cursed him. 15 seconds. Miriam closed her eyes, her expression peaceful. 10 seconds. Jack's hand trembled, reaching toward the lever. And then he heard it. A voice from the crowd, then another, then dozens. Stop this. This isn't justice. Release them. The crowd was rising. Not all of them, maybe not even half, but enough. Enough wolves standing from their seats, shouting their objection, refusing to watch this obscenity play out in their name. 5 seconds. Stop. Princess Ethel's voice cut through the chaos. She descended from her platform, running toward the arena. Father, stop! I forbid this. 0. The poison released. Green gas filled both chambers. Miriam's small one and the larger sphere with the 30. Jack fell to his knees, a sound like a wounded animal tearing from his throat. He'd failed. They were all dying because he'd refused to compromise, because he'd clung to his principles when lives hung in the balance. Aldrich was right. Mercy without the willingness to make hard choices was just... The gas cleared. The chambers opened. Miriam stepped out, alive. Behind her, the 30 emerged from their sphere, gasping but unharmed. Confusion rippled through the arena. Jack stared in disbelief. Illusion magic, Miriam said softly, approaching him. The gas was never poison. The chambers were never death traps. It was all theater, a test to see if you'd compromise your principles when you thought lives were at stake. Jack's mind reeled. But, you didn't know. I didn't know. We thought it was real, Miriam agreed. That was the point. To test whether your mercy held when you genuinely believed the cost was catastrophic. She smiled. And it did. You were willing to watch us die rather than become what you opposed. That's the difference between you and every other ruler this kingdom has seen. Jack turned to Aldrich, rage and relief and confusion warring in his chest. You. This was all fake? A trick? Not a trick, Aldrich said, but his expression was no longer victorious. It was troubled, uncertain, a test of character, and you. He trailed off, seeming unable to finish. He passed, Ethel said, reaching Jack's side. She addressed the crowd, her voice magically amplified. Jack passed. He proved that his principles aren't conditional, that his mercy isn't something he'll trade away when the cost becomes uncomfortable. That's what leadership needs, not ruthless pragmatism, but unshakable integrity. The crowd erupted, some in cheers, others in angry shouts. The kingdom was dividing before their eyes, those who believed in the old way versus those who dared to imagine something new. Aldrich stood at the center of the chaos, and for the first time since Jack had known him, the Alpha King looked lost, as if the ground beneath his feet had shifted, and he didn't know how to find his balance anymore. The trials are complete, Elder Moira announced, her voice cutting through the noise. 2 competitors, 2 different philosophies. Princess Ethel must now choose which one will stand beside her. All eyes turned to Ethel. She looked from Lysandra, efficient, pragmatic, everything the old order valued, to Jack, bleeding from the nose again, still shaking from the emotional trauma of the trial, but unbroken. I choose. Wait. The new voice came from the crowd. A section of the stands collapsed inward, not from structural failure but from magical assault. Wolves in dark armor poured through the breach, weapons drawn, moving with military precision. An invasion. During the trials. Impossible. At the head of the attackers rode a massive wolf, larger even than Aldrich's, with fur the color of midnight and eyes like burning coals. He shifted to human form, a scarred warrior with a smile that promised violence. Greetings, Aldrich, the warrior said. Remember me? Ragnar Bloodfang, Alpha of the Eastern Wastes. The pack you exiled 20 years ago for refusing to submit to your precious hierarchy. He gestured to his warriors, who spread through the arena like a dark tide. "We've been watching your little trials with great interest. And we've decided that while your kingdom tears itself apart, arguing about mercy versus strength will simply take it." Aldrich's aura exploded outward, but Ragnar's met it not overpowering but matching, two alpha wills colliding like thunder. "You dare attack during sacred trials," Aldrich snarled. "I dare," Ragnar replied. "Because I've realized something useful. You've spent so much energy fighting this wolfless boy and his philosophy of weakness that you've forgotten to guard your borders. Your warriors are here, watching a spectacle. Your defenses are minimal, and your kingdom," he smiled wider, "is ripe for conquest." The Eastern Waste's wolves howled in unison, a sound that promised blood and death and the end of everything Aldrich had built. And Jack, still kneeling in the center of the arena, realized with horrible clarity that the king's fury couldn't stop what came next. Because what came next wasn't a trial or a choice or a philosophical debate. It was war. Chapter 8. When alphas fall. Chaos erupted across the arena like a wildfire meeting dry kindling. Wolves shifted mid-panic, some fleeing toward the exits while others surged forward to defend their king. The Eastern Waste's warriors moved with brutal efficiency, cutting down anyone who stood between them and the royal platform. Jack watched it all unfold from his knees, still reeling from the emotional devastation of the trial. His mind couldn't quite process the shift from philosophical warfare to actual bloodshed. "Move!" Sherry appeared beside him, hauling him to his feet. "Unless you want to die here, move." She dragged him toward the edge of the arena as a Waste's warrior charged past, locked in combat with one of Aldrich's guards. Steel rang against claw. Blood sprayed across the sand. This was real. Horrifyingly, viscerally real. "The princess!" someone shouted. "Protect the princess." Jack's eyes found Ethel on the royal platform, surrounded by guards but looking terrifyingly vulnerable. Ragnar's forces were pushing toward her with single-minded purpose: take the air, control the kingdom. Aldrich stood between them and his daughter, his massive wolf form erupting in a cascade of fury and protective rage. His roar shook the very stones of the arena, and even Ragnar's warriors hesitated before such primal dominance. But Ragnar himself didn't hesitate. He shifted mid-charge, his midnight black wolf form crashing into Aldrich's with the force of an avalanche meeting a mountain. Two alphas, two philosophies of pure dominance, colliding in a way that transcended mere physical combat. Their auras pressed outward in visible waves, a battle of wills as much as bodies. Wolves throughout the arena collapsed under the pressure, unable to bear proximity to such concentrated power. Jack felt it too, that crushing weight demanding submission. But that presence inside him rose to meet it, creating a space of stillness in the storm. "We need to get out of here," Sherry said urgently. "Jack, there's nothing we can do. We're not warriors, we're not." "The princess," Jack interrupted, his eyes still fixed on Ethel. She was being moved toward an exit by her guards, but Ragnar's forces had anticipated the route. A squad of Waste's warriors intercepted them, and suddenly Ethel's protectors were fighting for their lives. One by one, they fell. Too many attackers, not enough defenders. "Jack, no." Sherry started, but he was already running. He had no weapon, no armor, no wolf, just his legs carrying him toward danger instead of away from it, driven by something he couldn't name and didn't have time to question. A Waste's warrior saw him coming, saw a wolfless boy charging into battle and laughed. He shifted partially, claws extending, preparing to gut this fool who thought he could. Jack slid under the swipe, grabbed a fallen guard's sword, and drove it upward with desperate strength. The blade caught the warrior in the exposed junction between armor plates. Not a killing blow, but enough to stagger him. "Princess," Jack shouted. "This way." Ethel's eyes found his through the chaos. For a moment, she looked shocked that he'd come for her. Then her royal training kicked in. She grabbed a fallen weapon and fought toward him, her movements surprisingly fluid for someone raised in palace luxury. They met in the middle of the carnage. Around them, the battle raged, Aldrich and Ragnar's titanic struggle at the center, smaller skirmishes spreading like fractures through ice. "You came back," Ethel said, breathless. Blood not hers splattered her white dress. "Where else would I go?" Jack replied, and meant it. A roar drew their attention. Aldrich's wolf form was being driven back, step by agonizing step. Ragnar was younger, faster, and horrifyingly possibly stronger. The Eastern Wastes Alpha had clearly spent 20 years preparing for this moment, honing himself into a weapon designed specifically to kill the king who'd exiled him. "Father!" Ethel screamed, terror breaking through her royal composure. Ragnar's jaws closed around Aldrich's throat. Time seemed to slow. The great Alpha King. 3 decades of absolute dominance being brought down by the one thing he'd never prepared for. Someone who'd spent years learning to counter his specific fighting style. Aldrich's wolf form flickered, shifting back to human. He lay in the sand, Ragnar's claws pressed against his throat, breathing but beaten. "Yield," Ragnar commanded, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent arena. Both armies had frozen, watching their leader's battle reach its conclusion. "Yield and I'll let you live. As a lesson. As proof that your philosophy of absolute dominance creates nothing but enemies waiting for their moment." Aldrich's eyes blazed with fury and humiliation. To yield, to submit, to bow to someone he'd exiled as unworthy. Everything he was, everything he'd built, demanded he refuse. But Ragnar's claws pressed deeper, drawing blood. Yield, or die, choose. And in that moment, Jack saw something he'd never expected to see. King Aldrich, the most powerful alpha in the Northern Kingdoms, hesitate, doubt, face the same impossible choice he'd forced so many others to make. "Father, please," Ethel called out, her voice breaking. "Please. Just yield. I need you alive." The mighty Alpha King closed his eyes, opened them, and in a voice that seemed to age him decades, whispered, "I yield." The words fell like stones into still water, rippling outward with implications that would reshape the kingdom. Ragnar stood, shifting back to human form. He was scarred, powerful, and victorious in a way that transcended mere physical triumph. "The Northern Kingdoms are mine now. By right of conquest. By Alpha Law, the very law Aldrich used to justify his reign." He turned to address the assembled wolves, both his warriors and Aldrich's former subjects. "I claim rulership of these lands. I claim the throne. And I claim," his eyes found Ethel, predatory and possessive, the princess as my mate, "to seal my legitimacy and unite our packs." Horror washed through the crowd. Ethel went pale, her hand tightening on her weapon. "No," she said firmly. "I won't. You don't have a choice," Ragnar said simply. "That's what conquest means. What your father's philosophy has always meant: the strong take what they want. I'm just applying his own logic." He gestured to his warriors. "Seize her." They moved forward, a dozen hardened killers surrounding the princess. Her remaining guards stepped between them. But they were outnumbered and exhausted. Jack's mind raced. This was everything he'd feared, everything Miriam had warned him about. When you reject the dominant power structure but have no power of your own to enforce a better way, you leave a vacuum. And vacuums get filled by whoever's willing to be most ruthless. That presence inside him surged, not offering power, but offering clarity, understanding, the ability to see what others couldn't. And what he saw was this. Ragnar wasn't stronger than Aldrich because of physical might. He was winning because he understood something fundamental, that Aldrich's philosophy created exactly this kind of challenge. That ruling through dominance meant you were always one battle away from being overthrown. Which meant, "Stop," Jack said, and that strange resonance carried his voice across the arena. Ragnar turned, his expression amused. "The wolfless boy, the idealist, come to lecture me about mercy and compassion." He laughed. "Save your breath. I've heard Aldrich's tales about you. Your philosophy is pretty, but I've just proven it's worthless. Compassion didn't stop my invasion. Mercy didn't protect your princess. Only strength matters, only power." "You're right," Jack said, and the admission sent shocked murmurs through the crowd. "Compassion didn't stop your invasion. Mercy isn't enough. You've proven that Aldrich's way, the belief that the strongest should rule, inevitably leads to exactly this. Endless cycles of violence where someone's always trying to prove they're stronger than whoever's on top." He walked forward, weaponless, approaching Ragnar across the blood-soaked sand. "But you've made a mistake," Jack continued. "The same mistake Aldrich made. You think defeating one alpha makes you the strongest. You think conquering this kingdom proves your philosophy is right. But you're wrong. Ragnar's expression darkened. Explain. Quickly. Before I tire of your words. Aldrich ruled through dominance, Jack said. And for 30 years, that seemed to work. But look at what it created: wolves like you, nursing grievances, and plotting revenge. Wolves like me, questioning whether domination is really the only way. A kingdom divided between those who bow and those who rebel. His strength didn't create stability. It created pressure, building and building, until it exploded. He stopped a few feet from Ragnar, close enough to see the scarred alpha's eyes, intelligent, calculating, dangerous. You've won a kingdom, Jack said. But what you've really won is exactly what Aldrich had: a throne that requires constant defense, constant vigilance, constant fear that someone stronger will come along. You've won the right to spend every day looking over your shoulder, wondering which of your own wolves is secretly planning to do to you what you just did to Aldrich. Something flickered in Ragnar's expression, not agreement, but consideration. What's your point, boy? My point, Jack said, is that there's another way. Not weakness disguised as mercy, not pacifism that leaves you defenseless, but something different. A way of leading that doesn't require you to constantly prove you're the strongest, that doesn't create endless cycles of revenge and rebellion. And what way is that? Ragnar asked, his tone skeptical but genuinely curious. Consent, Jack said simply. Leading people who choose to follow you. Not because they fear you, but because they believe in what you're trying to build. Creating a kingdom where strength is measured not by who you can dominate, but by what you can protect and nurture. Please subscribe if you believe there's another way to lead, one that doesn't require endless violence to maintain. Ragnar stared at him for a long moment. Then he threw his head back and laughed, not mockery, but something more complex. You're an idealist and a fool. But... He glanced around the arena, at the wolves watching with desperate hope in their eyes, at his own warriors who looked suddenly uncertain. You're also the first person in 30 years to offer an alternative to the cycle I've spent my life trapped in. He released his aggressive stance slightly. Speak. I'll listen, for now. And Jack realized, with dawning wonder and terror, that he was being given a chance, not to defeat Ragnar. He couldn't do that, had no power to enforce anything but to plant a seed, to show that there might be something worth building that didn't require constant conquest and domination. You won by alpha law, Jack said carefully. But alpha law is the problem. It means every victory is temporary. Every ruler lives in fear. Every strong wolf spends their life either dominating or being dominated. There's no peace in that system. Only endless war. Then what do you propose? Ragnar demanded. A choice, Jack said. Give the kingdom a choice. Not between you and Aldrich, between your philosophies, yes, but also between the old way and a new one. Let the wolves decide who they want to follow and why. Not through combat or domination, but through democracy. The word fell like a stone. Ancient concept, rarely practiced among wolf packs. Let them vote? Ragnar's eyes narrowed. You want me to give up the throne I just won by asking nicely if people want me? I want you to win something more valuable than a throne, Jack replied. Legitimacy. Real authority that doesn't require you to beat down every challenger. If the wolves choose you, truly choose you, then you don't need to rule through fear. You can rule through trust. And if they don't choose me, then you step aside and prove that you're stronger than Aldrich in the way that actually matters, strong enough to let people be free. Silence. The entire arena held its breath. Ragnar looked at Jack as if seeing him clearly for the first time. You're either brilliant or insane. Possibly both. He turned to address the crowd. Here's my offer. I will hold the throne for 1 month. During that time, let the wolves of this kingdom see what my leadership offers. At the end of that month, we'll hold a vote, something this kingdom has never done. The wolves will choose between my way, Aldrich's way, or, he gestured to Jack, this boy's way. Whatever that turns out to be. Whichever philosophy wins the most supporters becomes the new foundation for the kingdom. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. This was unprecedented, insane, revolutionary. And the princess? Ethel asked, her voice steady despite her fear. Ragnar studied her appraisingly. Remains free to choose her own mate. After the vote. Because if I'm going to try this legitimacy through choice approach, I can't very well start by forcing a marriage. His smile was sharp. Though I intend to compete for that honor fairly. He turned back to Jack. 1 month. Prove your philosophy can work. Show that mercy and compassion and all your pretty ideals can actually protect people, can create something stable. And if you fail, if chaos and weakness are all your way produces, then I take the throne permanently, by popular demand. Agreed. Jack's mind raced. This was more than he'd dared hope for, a genuine chance to prove there was another way. But it was also terrifying. 1 month to build something sustainable from nothing, with the entire kingdom watching and judging. But what choice did he have? Refuse, and Ragnar would rule by conquest. Accept, and at least there was a chance. Agreed, Jack said. Ragnar extended his hand. Jack took it, and they shook, warrior and idealist, two opposing forces agreeing to a temporary truce in service of discovering what truth might exist beyond their philosophical divide. This should be interesting, Ragnar said. Then louder, release Aldrich. He's no longer king, but he's not a prisoner either. Let him watch as we determine whether his life's work was worth anything. The guards released the fallen Alpha. Aldrich rose slowly, looking older than Jack had ever seen him. Defeated, lost. Ethel rushed to her father, and for the first time, Jack saw them not as king and princess, but as father and daughter. Aldrich wrapped his arms around Ethel, and his shoulders shook with something that might have been sobs. The mighty Alpha King, crying. The image would haunt Jack for days. 1 month, Ragnar repeated, his voice carrying across the arena. 30 days to prove that the strong don't need to dominate, that mercy isn't weakness, that there's another way to be powerful. He smiled at Jack, not friendly, but respectful. I hope you're ready, boy, because you've just talked your way into the hardest job in the kingdom. And if you fail, it won't just be your philosophy that dies. It'll be every wolf who dared to believe in it. Jack nodded, his throat tight with fear and determination in equal measure. The king's fury couldn't stop what came next. But what came next was something no one, not Aldrich, not Ragnar, not even Jack himself, had fully anticipated. A month to change everything, or prove that nothing could change at all. The real trial was just beginning. Chapter 9. The 30 Days. The first week was chaos. Ragnar took residence in the castle, but to his credit, he didn't claim Aldrich's throne. Instead, he established a temporary council chamber where representatives from different districts could voice their concerns. It wasn't democracy yet, more like controlled observation, but it was more than the kingdom had ever seen under Alpha rule. Aldrich retreated to the eastern wing with Ethel, stripped of title but not dignity. Jack visited them on the 3rd day, finding the former king staring out a window at the kingdom he'd lost. Come to gloat? Aldrich asked without turning. No, Jack said quietly. To ask for help. That got Aldrich's attention. He turned, surprise flickering across his weathered face. Help? From me? The tyrant you've spent weeks proving wrong? You weren't a tyrant, Jack said, surprising himself with the admission. You were a leader who believed the only way to protect people was through strength. And for 30 years, that belief kept the kingdom relatively safe. I may disagree with your methods, but I can't deny they worked. For a time, Aldrich's expression softened fractionally, but not anymore. Not anymore, Jack agreed. Because the world changed, or maybe it was always changing, and your philosophy couldn't adapt. Either way, we're here now, and I have 1 month to prove there's another way. A way that doesn't require the next generation to repeat the cycle of violence you and Ragnar are trapped in. What do you need from me? Knowledge. Experience. You ruled for 30 years. You understand logistics, resource management, how to keep thousands of wolves fed and safe. I'm 17 years old and have never led anything. If I'm going to prove compassion can be practical, I need to learn from someone who actually knows how kingdoms work. Aldrich studied him for a long moment. You're asking your enemy to help you defeat everything he believes in. I'm asking someone who loves this kingdom to help me save it, Jack corrected, even if the version I'm trying to save looks different from the one you built. Silence stretched between them. Then Aldrich did something Jack never expected. He smiled. It was tired, sad, but genuine. You remind me of someone, Aldrich said quietly. Someone I used to be. before the world taught me that idealism was a luxury leaders couldn't afford. He straightened. Very well, I'll help. Not because I think you'll succeed, but because I'd rather you fail informed than fail ignorant. And maybe. He trailed off, something vulnerable crossing his face. Maybe I want to see if I was wrong. If there really is another way. From that day forward, Aldrich became Jack's unlikely mentor. Every morning, they met in the library. The former king taught Jack about supply chains, territorial management, the delicate balance of trade and diplomacy, how to read people, how to anticipate problems, how to turn philosophical principles into practical policies. Compassion is fine, Aldrich said during one session, but people need food, shelter, safety. How will your philosophy provide those things when wolves challenge your authority? By making authority less about personal dominance and more about collective responsibility, Jack replied. Instead of everyone looking to one alpha for protection, we distribute power, create systems where strength comes from cooperation rather than individual might. Idealistic nonsense, Aldrich muttered, but he didn't sound entirely convinced of his own criticism. The second week, Jack began implementing changes. Small ones at first, testing the waters. He established a council of representatives, not nobles chosen by birth, but wolves elected by their districts, farmers, merchants, warriors, scholars, people who actually understood their community's needs. The first meeting was chaos. Wolves who'd spent their lives in rigid hierarchy suddenly had permission to speak freely, and years of suppressed grievances erupted. The taxation system is crushing us, a farmer said. We produce the food, but see none of the profit. The trade routes favor the capital, a merchant added. Border districts are starving while the nobles feast. The warrior class gets all the glory, a scholar interjected. But knowledge builds civilizations, not swords. It went on for hours. Arguments, accusations, centuries of resentment spilling out like poison from a wound. Jack let them talk, let them rage. And when they finally exhausted themselves, he said simply, "Thank you. For the first time, I actually understand what needs to change." "That's it?" the farmer asked. "We complain and you just listen?" "Listening is the first step," Jack replied. "You can't solve problems you don't understand. And I've learned that the wolves living these struggles understand them better than any alpha sitting in a throne room ever could." Ragnar attended these meetings, sitting in the back, watching with calculating eyes. Afterward, he'd approach Jack with observations. "You let them argue for hours. No alpha would tolerate such disorder." "It's not disorder," Jack replied. "It's democracy finding its voice. It'll be messy at first, but once people learn they can speak without being punished, the quality of discussion will improve. Or it'll descend into mob rule and chaos," Ragnar countered. But he kept coming to the meetings, kept watching. The third week brought the first real test. A border skirmish erupted. Wolves from a neighboring territory crossed into the northern kingdoms, raiding a village and killing 3 before fleeing back across the border. The traditional response was obvious: send warriors, punish the offending pack, demonstrate strength. "We must retaliate," Ragnar insisted during the emergency council meeting. "Show them we're not weak." "Agreed," said several council members, even some who'd supported Jack's reforms. "No," Jack said quietly. "No?" Ragnar's eyes narrowed. 3 of our wolves are dead. Their blood demands justice." "Justice, yes, but not revenge," Jack replied. "If we retaliate, they retaliate back. And suddenly we're in a war that benefits no one except wolves who profit from violence." "Then what do you propose?" Aldrich asked, his voice neutral but his eyes sharp. This was the test he'd been waiting for, proof that mercy was inadequate when violence arrived. "Diplomacy," Jack said. "We send envoys. We investigate why they raided. Was it desperation? Hunger? A rogue faction their alpha doesn't control? We find the root cause and address it. And while we're talking," Ragnar said coldly, "they raid again. Kill more of our people. Interpret our mercy as weakness. Then we defend," Jack said firmly. "I'm not saying we don't protect ourselves. I'm saying we don't assume violence is the first or only solution. We try understanding before destruction." The council argued for hours. In the end, Jack's solution passed by a narrow margin. Envoys were sent, accompanied by a strong defensive force not to attack, but to demonstrate capability. The delegation returned 5 days later with surprising news. The raid had been conducted by desperate refugees, fleeing famine in their own territory. Their alpha had been overthrown by a brutal warlord who'd driven them out. The raid wasn't aggression, it was survival. So what do we do? A council member asked. We can't feed every refugee pack. We can't, Jack agreed. But we can help them reclaim their territory. Support them in overthrowing the warlord. Give them the resources to rebuild, rather than forcing them to raid. It was expensive, risky, complicated, but the council approved it. And when the refugee wolves successfully retook their lands with Northern Kingdom support but not dominance, they became allies instead of enemies. Trading partners instead of threats. Ragnar approached Jack after the news arrived. I underestimated you, he said bluntly. I thought compassion meant weakness, but you just turned potential enemies into allies. That's strategic. Clever. Not what I expected. Compassion isn't weakness, Jack said. It's intelligence. Understanding that long-term stability comes from addressing problems rather than just suppressing them through force. But it requires patience, Ragnar observed. And resources. And trust that others won't exploit your mercy. Yes, Jack agreed. All true. It's not perfect, but neither is ruling through fear. At least this way, we're building something that might last beyond the next strong alpha deciding they want to conquer. Ragnar nodded slowly, thoughtfully, and Jack saw something shift in the warrior's expression. Not full conversion, but possibility. The recognition that maybe there was merit to this approach. He'd dismissed as naive idealism. The 4th week arrived, and with it, the first real tragedy. A young wolf named Mira had been accused of theft. Under Aldrich's law, the punishment was severe loss of a hand for first offense. But Jack had suspended such punishments, replacing them with rehabilitation and restitution. The council debated Mira's case. She'd stolen medicine for her dying mother. The merchant she'd stolen from wanted punishment. Mira wanted mercy. Jack ruled for rehabilitation. Mira would work off her debt, the merchant would be compensated, no permanent harm done. 3 days later, Mira stole again. Not medicine this time, but gold. Sold it and fled, leaving chaos in her wake. The council erupted. This is what mercy gets you, one member shouted. She exploited your compassion. We should have punished her. Another added. Now she's rewarded for theft and taught others that mercy is weakness. Jack sat through the accusations, feeling each one like a physical blow. They were right. He'd been merciful, and it had been exploited. One bad actor had undermined weeks of careful progress. That night, he found Aldrich in the library, looking unsurprised by Jack's appearance. You heard, Jack said. Everyone's heard. It's all anyone's talking about. Aldrich poured 2 glasses of wine, offering one to Jack. This is the lesson I learned years ago. The lesson I've been waiting for you to learn. Mercy only works when everyone chooses to honor it. But people are selfish, opportunistic, willing to exploit kindness. That's why law needs teeth. Why punishment needs to be harsh enough to deter. Jack drank, the wine bitter on his tongue. So you were right. Compassion doesn't work in the real world. I didn't say that, Aldrich replied softly. I said mercy alone isn't enough. But, he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I've watched you these past weeks. Watched you build something I never thought possible. And yes, Mira exploited you. One person out of thousands failed to honor the trust you extended. Does that invalidate everything else you've accomplished? The council thinks so. The council is afraid, Aldrich corrected. Because if your way works, it means they've spent their lives bowing to a system that didn't need to be so cruel. That's terrifying. Easier to seize on one failure than acknowledge dozens of successes. He stood, placing a hand on Jack's shoulder, a gesture of respect that would have been unthinkable a month ago. Learn from this. Adapt. That's what I failed to do. I built a perfect system in my mind and refused to adjust when reality proved more complex. Don't make my mistake. Mira exploited your mercy, yes, so add safeguards. Create consequences for those who abuse trust. But don't abandon compassion entirely. That's the coward's way out. Jack looked up at the former Alpha King. Why are you helping me, really? I'm literally trying to prove your entire worldview was wrong. Aldrich smiled sadly. Because Ethel asked me to. Because I want to believe there's something worth building beyond endless cycles of dominance. And because, he hesitated, because I see in you the man I might have become, if I'd been braver. If I'd fought harder to hold on to my idealism instead of letting the world beat it out of me. He left Jack alone with those words and the bottle of wine. The final days of the month approached. Jack refined the policies, added safeguards against exploitation, balanced mercy with accountability. It wasn't perfect. Nothing was. But it was better. Measurably. Demonstrably better than the system that had existed before. The vote was scheduled for the month's last day. Every adult wolf in the kingdom would choose. Ragnar's way: strength through conquest, leadership earned by combat, the traditional alpha hierarchy with a more pragmatic leader. Aldrich's way: the old system restored, with modifications to address its worst excesses, proven stability even if it came with harshness. Or, Jack's way: distributed power, democratic representation, compassion balanced with practical safeguards, an experiment in something entirely new. The night before the vote, Jack couldn't sleep. He walked the castle halls, his mind racing with doubts and fears and hopes. He found Ethel on a balcony, staring at the moon. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "Too much at stake," Jack replied, joining her at the railing. "Tomorrow, the kingdom decides its future. And if they choose Ragnar or your father, everything I've tried to build disappears." "Would that be so terrible?" Ethel asked quietly. "Ragnar has shown himself to be pragmatic. Father has learned from his mistakes. Either option offers stability. But not justice," Jack said. "Not real equality. Just slightly better versions of the same hierarchy that's created centuries of pain." Ethel turned to face him fully. In the moonlight, her eyes were impossibly complex: ice and fire, doubt and determination. "Can I tell you something I've never told anyone?" she asked. "Always. I don't know what I want," she admitted. "My whole life, I was raised to be the perfect heir to Father's kingdom, taught that strength meant dominance, that mercy was weakness, that the strong protecting the weak was the natural order, and I believed it. I still believe parts of it." She looked down at her hands. "But then you appeared, and you challenged everything, and for the first time I wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was another way to be strong. A way that didn't require me to become someone I'm not sure I want to be." "What do you want?" Jack asked gently. "I want both," she said. "The stability my father built, and the compassion you're trying to create. I want a kingdom that's strong enough to protect its people, but kind enough to deserve them. And I don't know if that's possible. If I'm capable of leading something that complex." Jack took her hand, surprising both of them. "You are. I've watched you these past weeks. You're not your father. You're not Ragnar. You're something new, someone who can understand strength without worshipping it. Someone who can appreciate mercy without being blinded by it. That's exactly what this kingdom needs." "And if they vote for Ragnar tomorrow?" she asked. "Or father?" "Then we've still accomplished something," Jack said. "We've shown that there are alternatives. Planted seeds that might grow long after we're gone." Changed the conversation from, "Should the strong rule?" to "How should power be used?" "That's not nothing." Ethel smiled, genuine, warm, the first truly unguarded expression he'd seen from her. "When did you get so wise?" "I'm not wise," Jack said. "I'm just too stubborn to give up. There's a difference." They stood together in the moonlight. And for a moment, the weight of tomorrow's vote felt distant, manageable. Then dawn came, and with it, the day that would decide everything. Chapter 10. The New Alpha. The Grand Hall had been transformed into a voting chamber. 3 sections divided the space. One for each philosophy, each marked with its corresponding symbol. Ragnar's section bore a sword: strength through conquest. Aldrich's displayed a crown: traditional hierarchy. Jack's showed an open hand: shared power. Every adult wolf in the northern kingdoms had been summoned. Thousands filled the hall and the grounds beyond. their voices creating a constant hum of nervous energy. This was unprecedented, terrifying, revolutionary. Jack stood at the front with Ragnar and Aldrich, the three representatives of different possible futures. Ethel watched from the royal platform, her expression carefully neutral, though Jack caught her gaze several times and saw the uncertainty there. Elder Moira raised her staff, and silence fell like snow. Wolves of the northern kingdoms, her reedy voice carried through magical amplification. Today, you are granted something your ancestors never possessed: choice. Not the choice of which alpha to bow to, but the choice of how you wish to be governed. She gestured to each section in turn. Ragnar Bloodfang offers strength through proven combat. He defeated King Aldrich in fair challenge and promises security through military might and clear hierarchy. Murmurs of approval from the warrior class. Ragnar stood tall, confident, every inch the conquering alpha. Aldrich Stormcrown offers the restoration of traditional order, modified by lessons learned, 30 years of stability, with safeguards against the excesses that led to his fall. Louder murmurs. Many wolves had prospered under Aldrich's rule. The familiarity was appealing, even if the system had its flaws. And Jack of No Pack offers distributed power, democratic representation, a system where leadership comes not from dominance but from consent, where strength means protecting rather than ruling. The quietest response: this was the unknown, the experiment, the risk. Each wolf will approach the platform, Moira continued, and place a stone in the section representing their choice. We will count at day's end. The philosophy with the most stones becomes our new foundation. She paused, letting the weight settle. Choose wisely, choose honestly. This decision will shape generations. The voting began. It was agonizingly slow. Each wolf approached individually, considered the three sections, placed their stone. Some chose quickly, their minds long made up. Others hesitated, torn between familiar safety and uncertain possibility. Jack watched the stones accumulate. Ragnar's section filled steadily warriors, mostly, and wolves who valued strength above all. Aldrich's filled faster nobles, merchants, anyone who'd prospered under the old system and feared change. Jack's section grew slowest. Each stone felt like a small miracle. A farmer who'd been heard for the first time in the council. A young wolf who'd seen mercy work. A mother who wanted her children to grow up in a world where worth wasn't determined by dominance. Hours passed. The sun reached its zenith, then began its descent. The stones piled higher in all three sections, but two rose faster than the third. Jack's heart sank as he watched. He'd known this was possible, likely, even but seeing it happen felt like watching hope drain away drop by drop. Beside him, Ragnar radiated confidence. Aldrich's expression was more complex, not triumphant, but not disappointed either. As if he'd expected this outcome, and made peace with it. You gave them a beautiful dream, Aldrich said quietly, speaking to Jack without looking at him. But dreams are fragile things. Reality demands harder choices. It's not over yet, Jack replied, though even he could hear the doubt in his voice. No, Aldrich agreed. But sometimes the bravest thing is accepting when you've been defeated with grace. More hours. The crowd outside reported their votes to designated counters. The stones continued to pile up, each one a judgment on everything Jack had tried to build. As sunset approached, Elder Moira called for the final count. 3 elders approached each section, carefully tallying the stones, while the entire hall held its breath. The wait was excruciating. Finally, Moira returned to her position, holding 3 sealed scrolls. She opened the first. Ragnar Bloodfang. 4,217 stones. Approving shouts from his supporters. A strong showing. Not a majority of the kingdom, but a substantial portion. She opened the second scroll. Aldrich Stormcrown. 5,342 stones. Louder cheers. The old system, the familiar hierarchy, had won the most support. Jack felt his stomach drop. It was over. He'd failed. Moira opened the third scroll, and her ancient eyes widened fractionally before she schooled her expression. Jack of No Pack. 7,961 stones. The hall erupted in chaos. Jack stood frozen, unable to process what he'd just heard. 7,000. That was more than half the kingdom. More than the other 2 combined. There must be a mistake. Ragnar said, his voice tight with shock and barely controlled fury. Recount them. The boy he can't have. There is no mistake, Moira said firmly. I have verified the count 3 times. The wolves have spoken. They have chosen change over familiarity, compassion over conquest, democracy over dominance. She turned to Jack, and for the first time in her ancient life, she smiled. Jack of no pack, by the will of the people, you are hereby recognized as the chosen leader of the Northern Kingdoms. Not king, not alpha, but something new. What title you take, how you lead, what you build, those decisions are yours to make. Jack's knees nearly buckled. 7,000 wolves had believed in him, had chosen to risk everything on an uncertain future rather than cling to the certainty of oppression. How? Aldrich asked, and he sounded genuinely curious rather than angry. How did you convince so many? I didn't convince them of anything, Jack said, his voice shaking. I just gave them permission to believe what they already felt. That they deserved better. That strength didn't have to mean cruelty. That there might be another way. Ragnar stepped forward, and for a moment, Jack thought the warrior might attack. But instead, Ragnar extended his hand. I underestimated you, Ragnar said, completely. I thought compassion was weakness, that mercy would lead to chaos. But you proved me wrong. You organized this kingdom, solved problems, turned enemies into allies, all without the dominance I thought was essential. He gripped Jack's hand firmly. I yield. Not because you defeated me in combat, but because you won something more important. You won hearts. And maybe that's the kind of strength that actually lasts. They shook, and something fundamental shifted. The old way, acknowledging the new. Not through conquest, but through choice. Aldrich approached next. The former king looked older than ever, but there was peace in his expression. You did it, he said simply. You proved there was another way. And you proved that I was wrong. He placed his hand on Jack's shoulder. I spent 30 years building a kingdom on dominance because I thought it was the only language the world understood. But you taught the world a new language. One I was too afraid to speak. I couldn't have done it without you, Jack said honestly. Your knowledge, your experience, I would have failed without your help. Perhaps, Aldrich agreed. But you had the courage to ask, to see me not as an enemy to destroy but as a resource to learn from. That's wisdom I never possessed. He stepped back. I don't know what comes next, what your democracy will look like in practice. But I'm willing to help. If you'll have an old alpha who's still learning new tricks. Always, Jack said. The hall erupted in celebration. Not universal, there were still those who looked angry, betrayed, convinced this would lead to disaster. But the majority cheered, cried, embraced. They'd chosen hope over fear, and the relief was palpable. Ethel descended from the platform, and the crowd parted for her like water. She stopped before Jack, her expression unreadable. So, she said, you won. Against all odds, all expectations. You convinced a kingdom to gamble on compassion. We convinced them, Jack corrected. You stood by this, gave it legitimacy when your support mattered most. I did, Ethel agreed, because I wanted to believe you were right, that there was another way to be strong. She paused. And because I realized something these past weeks. What? That I want to stand beside someone who lifts people up, not someone who holds them down. Someone who sees power as responsibility rather than privilege. She extended her hand. So I'm making a choice of my own. Not as princess, not as heir, but as Ethel. I choose to stand with you, to help you build this new kingdom. If you'll have me. Jack took her hand, and something electric passed between them. Not just romance, though that was there. Undeniable, but partnership, recognition, the sense that together, they might actually be capable of the impossible task ahead. I'll have you, he said. Not as a prize or a political alliance, but as an equal. A partner. Someone whose voice matters as much as mine. She smiled, radiant, genuine, free. That's all I ever wanted. To be seen as more than my father's daughter, or a prize to be won. To be valued for who I am, not what I represent. The crowd cheered louder, sensing the significance of this moment. The old and new, joining together. Hierarchy and democracy, finding common ground. Miriam appeared at Jack's elbow, materializing from the crowd like she always did. Well done, child. You've accomplished something I thought might be impossible. It's not accomplished yet, Jack said. This is just the beginning. The hard part comes next, actually making this work. Proving that democracy can be stable. That compassion can be practical. That this wasn't just a beautiful mistake. True, Miriam agreed. You've won the right to try. Now comes the work of succeeding, and it will be harder than anything you've faced so far. Because ruling with consent means constant negotiation, endless compromise, the hard work of finding solutions everyone can live with. I know, Jack said. But at least now, when problems arise, we'll face them together. Not with one person deciding for everyone, but with everyone having a voice in the solution. And when voices disagree? Miriam asked. When there's no consensus? When quick decisions are needed and democracy moves too slowly? Then we'll figure it out, Jack said firmly. We'll make mistakes, learn from them, adjust. That's what living systems do. They adapt, they grow, they improve. Unlike static hierarchies that resist change until they shatter. Miriam smiled. You've learned well. Better than I dared hope. She began to fade into the crowd. I'll be watching. And when you need guidance, which you will, I'll be there. But this kingdom is yours now. Yours to shape. Yours to protect. Yours to nurture into something the world has never seen. She disappeared, leaving Jack surrounded by thousands of wolves whose futures now rested on his untested philosophy. Elder Moira called for attention once more. The vote is complete. The choice is made. But one question remains. She turned to Jack. You have rejected the titles of King and Alpha. What shall you be called? What title represents this new way of leading? Jack thought for a moment, feeling the weight of history and possibility pressing down on him. Steward, he said finally. Not ruler, not owner, but steward. Someone who holds power in trust for the people. Who's responsible to them, not above them. Who serves rather than commands. Steward Jack, Moira intoned, testing the words. It has a strange sound. But then, this is a strange day for strange choices. She raised her staff. Then let it be known Jack of Nopak is hereby recognized as first steward of the Northern Kingdoms. May his leadership bring peace, prosperity, and justice to all wolves under his care. The hall erupted once more. This time, even some of Ragnar's and Aldrich's supporters joined in. Because whatever reservations they had about the method, they couldn't deny the result: a kingdom united not through fear, but through choice. 3 months later, the council chamber was full again. Representatives from every district gathered to discuss the winter preparations. Arguments filled the air, heated, passionate, but no longer dangerous. Disagreement without dominance. Debate without destruction. Jack sat not on a throne, but at a circular table, one voice among many. Beside him sat Ethel, now co-steward, her political acumen proving invaluable in navigating the complex new system. Across from them, Aldrich served as advisor on practical governance, his 30 years of experience tempered by newfound humility. Even Ragnar had stayed, becoming head of the military council, bringing his strategic mind to defense without conquest. The vote concluded. The council approved the winter plan, not Jack's original proposal, but a modified version incorporating suggestions from a dozen different voices. Compromise. Collaboration. Democracy in action. Meeting adjourned, Ethel announced. Same time next week. As the representatives filed out, Aldrich approached Jack. You handled that well. 3 months ago, that argument would have descended into chaos. Now they actually listen to each other. We still have a long way to go, Jack said. The border territories are restless. The noble class is still resisting the loss of hereditary privileges. And there are whispers of wolves who think we've abandoned tradition entirely. There will always be resistance, Aldrich agreed. Change is frightening, but you've proven something crucial: that this system can work. That democracy isn't just beautiful theory but practical reality. That's more than I ever accomplished. He left, and Jack stood alone in the empty chamber, looking at the circular table that had replaced the throne. Satisfied? Ethel's voice came from the doorway. Terrified, Jack admitted. Every day, I wake up convinced this will be the day it all falls apart, that I'll make a mistake that proves the old ways were right all along. Good, Ethel said, moving to stand beside him. The moment you become certain, the moment you think you have all the answers, that's when you become dangerous. That's what happened to my father. He built a perfect system in his mind and refused to see when reality proved more complex. So I should always be afraid? Jack asked wryly. Not afraid. Humble. Aware that you don't have all the answers. Open to learning. Changing. Growing. She took his hand. That's what makes you different from every other leader this kingdom has known. You understand that strength isn't about being right, it's about being willing to admit when you're wrong and correct course. They stood together, looking at the table that represented everything they were trying to build. Do you think it'll last? Jack asked quietly. This experiment? Or will some new alpha rise up, take power by force, and we'll be right back where we started? Maybe, Ethel said honestly. Probably, even. Nothing lasts forever. But that's not failure, that's life. Systems grow, adapt, evolve, die, and are replaced by something new. The question isn't whether this will last forever. It's whether what we build now makes people's lives better than what came before. And does it? She smiled. The farmers who spoke in council today who were heard and their concerns addressed? They think so. The young wolves who see paths to influence beyond combat prowess? They think so. The families who don't live in fear of an alpha's displeasure? They definitely think so. She squeezed his hand. You changed this kingdom, Jack. Not perfectly. Not completely. But measurably. And every wolf who breathes easier because of that change. They're your legacy. Not laws or systems or grand philosophies, but actual people living better lives. That's what matters. Jack pulled her close, grateful for her presence, her wisdom, her willingness to share this impossible burden. Thank you, he said simply. For what? For choosing to stand with me. For believing this crazy idea might work. For being brave enough to challenge your own upbringing and embrace something new. Thank you for showing me there was something worth embracing, Ethel replied. For proving that strength could be gentle, that power could be shared, that leadership could be service rather than domination. They stood together as the sun set through the chamber windows, casting long shadows across the circular table. Outside, the kingdom continued its work, messy, complicated, imperfect, but unmistakably better than what had come before. The king's fury couldn't stop what came next. Because what came next wasn't about kings or fury or the dominance of singular wills. It was about thousands of ordinary wolves, making thousands of small choices, building something extraordinary, one decision at a time. It was about recognizing that strength didn't require cruelty, that mercy wasn't weakness, that the most powerful force in the world wasn't dominance or conquest or alpha might. It was consent, choice. The simple, radical act of treating people as equals worthy of respect rather than subjects to be ruled. Jack stood at the center of that revolution, not as a king but as a steward. Not as the answer but as someone willing to keep asking better questions. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Jack made his choice. Now it's your turn. Would you rather live under a leader who keeps you safe through fear, or one who gives you freedom but can't guarantee your protection? Drop your answer in the comments, I want to know where you stand.